Chapter 1377. While Tang Jun was sighing inwardly, Lu Yi took out another item. It was the Void Beast's core. Tang Jun tilted his head and looked at it. He couldn't recognize its mysteries. Although he was experienced, Void Beasts were rare. He had never seen one before, let alone the Void Beast's core. He could only guess that this item was the key to escaping. The next moment he felt the power in his body being mobilized. It flowed into Lu Ye's body through the palm on his back. Lu Ye's expression changed. Although he had guessed that borrowing Yu Yao's power would put him under great pressure, when he actually did it, he realized that he had been too naive. He had only used the Flying Rainbow Phoenix spirit pattern on Thought Moon Immortal before. Back then, the two of them had been chased by Wanzhong Gang from Wanmo Ridge's lonely mountain city. Thought Moon Immortal had been seriously injured and couldn't fight anymore. Lu Yi had borrowed her power to stall Wanzhong Gang until Yi and Hupa came to his rescue with the spirit pattern he had left behind, forcing Wanzhong Gang to retreat. At that time he had been at the True Lake Realm, while Thought Moon Immortal had been at the Divine Sea Realm. Although their cultivations were a whole realm apart, the power in their bodies was spiritual power. They were of the same nature. Even so, after that battle, Lu Yi had been seriously injured and had fallen unconscious. Because he had used a power that didn't belong to him, he would definitely be injured. If spiritual power of the same nature was like this, what more the higher quality power of the Yu Yao realm? Lu Yi suddenly felt like he could explode and die at any moment. This feeling was familiar. On Mount Fengsuan's immortal spirit peak, when the pearl Su Yuqing had given him had exploded in his body, he had felt this way. Sunshine and Yu Yao's power were of the same nature. He forced himself to calm down and quickly guided Tang Jun's power into the Void Beast's core. During this process, he could clearly feel that Tang Jun's power was causing damage to his flesh and blood. Even his organs were trembling. This kind of pain was thousands of times more intense than the spatial turbulence scraping his flesh. Lu Yi knew that he had to do something, or he wouldn't be able to hold on. Thinking back to what had happened on the Immortal Spirit Peak, Lu Yi gritted his teeth and activated the power of the talent tree. He began to refine the higher quality energy and he finally felt a little better. Tang Jun's expression was solemn, and he didn't resist at all, allowing Lu Yi to mobilize his own power. He had a general idea of what Lu Yi was trying to do. He wanted to use his own power to stimulate that lotus root-like treasure. He was only worried about one thing now, and that was whether the young man behind him could hold on. If he could, then there was still a glimmer of hope. If he couldn't, then everything would be over. Although Lu Yi didn't make a sound, the big hand on his back was trembling violently. Obviously he was enduring great pain. Tang Jun also admired such perseverance and wisdom. Behind Tang Jun, Lu Yi clenched his teeth and held on, blood flowing from his 7 orifices. He had clearly suffered internal injuries. The Void Beast's core also began to tremble, and he almost couldn't hold on any longer. But he still forcibly suppressed it, not allowing the power of the Void Beast's core to erupt. This was because there was only one chance. It wasn't that the Void Beast's core couldn't support more attempts, but that if he couldn't succeed this time, then no matter how many times he tried, it would be useless. He couldn't just tell Tang Jun to cultivate harder and reach the late Moon Jade realm, could he? At his level of cultivation, it wasn't so easy to advance. After half a cup of tea's worth of time, Lu Yi finally couldn't hold on any longer, and Tang Jun's aura weakened. Only then did he let out a low shout, and the front of the Void Beast's core shot out a beam of light, bombarding the void in front of him. Just like before, as the beam of light appeared, the space in front of him began to melt and expand. Lu Ye's eyes were fixed on this beam of light, ready to move at a moment's notice. Tang Jun also knew that success or failure would depend on this, and his heart was in his throat. Under the two's nervous gazes, the space around them melted faster and faster, and even the surrounding space turbulence became incomparably violent. It seemed that the Void Beast's core's power had triggered a series of reactions here. At this moment, Lu Ye's injuries were heavy, and Tang Jun was an arrow at the end of its flight. If the violent space turbulence swept over them, even with Lu Ye's Void Spirit rune, he might not be able to protect them. Amidst the nervous and perturbed weight, a strange phenomenon suddenly appeared at the melting space. It was as if a layer of obstruction had been broken open, and a dazzling starry sky suddenly appeared at the original position of the void of chaos. The moment they saw this starry sky, Lu Yi and Tang Jun moved almost at the same time, the two of them rushing forward like hungry dogs, one in front and one behind. Their field of vision brightened, and a vast starry sky appeared before them, no longer surrounded by the harsh environment from before. They were free. Realizing this, Lu Yi immediately fled to the side, and at the same time, Tang Jun also fled to the other side. The two figures who had cooperated and waited sincerely just a moment ago, instantly flew apart. Cooperation was one thing, but vigilance was still necessary, and both of them were clear about this. After flying for dozens of miles, Lu Yi stopped and turned around to look back. On the other side, Tang Jun also stopped, and with about 100 miles between them, the two looked at each other in dismay. Looking back again, the place where the two of them had escaped from was only a huge circular passage, inside of which was turbid and chaotic. The gap opened by the void beast's core had long since disappeared. This was the first time Lu Yi had seen this insect path with his own eyes, and for a moment he was amazed, but he also knew that this thing had just been formed and was not stable enough for people to pass through. Perhaps it would be able to in the future, or perhaps it would never be able to. He just didn't know where the other end of this insect path led to. When his cultivation was higher in the future, he might be able to explore it, but at this moment, Lu Yi was not in the mood. "Little friend Tai Bai." Tang Jun's voice came from 100 miles away. Lu Yi turned around and saw the old man salute him from afar. "Thank you for this time, little friend. Don't worry, what I said to you before was from the bottom of my heart. The grudge between our worlds is now written off, and in the future no one from the Qingli Taoist world will offend your world." Lu Yi nodded slightly. That had better be the case. Several cultivators from the Qingli Taoist world who had done evil in the Wushuang continent were killed by him, and even Qin Yuan Dai Yu Yao was dead. If this matter could be stopped, it would be for the best. At present, the 9 states did not have the capital to be hostile to other large realms, and with the red talisman in his hand and the purple talisman he had distributed, he could only protect himself for a short time. Tang Jun probably believed that he had mentioned that the Wushuang continent was a subordinate of Mount Fangtsuan in the east, so from the old man's point of view, it was extremely irrational for the Qingli Taoist world to continue to be hostile to the Wushuang continent. Other things aside, the red talisman in Lu Ye's hand was equivalent to their Yu Yao. If there was a second talisman, who knew if there would be a third? After this incident of being trapped on the insect path, the two of them could be said to have gone through a lot together. With the two of them presiding, the conflict between the two realms could be considered to have ended. "We'll meet again someday." Tang Jun saluted again, turned around and flew out. The old man had used up too much of his energy, and obviously needed to find a place to recover. After watching his figure disappear, Lu Yi turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood, grimacing in pain. Tang Jun had used up too much energy, but he was seriously injured and had to find a place to heal quickly. He secretly decided that in the future he would not easily use the flight of the rainbow phoenix to borrow strength from others, as it was not a good thing to borrow too much strength. Half a day later, Lu Yi landed on a desolate star. In the starry sky there were many such desolate stars, and the environment was usually extremely harsh, not enough to support life. Aside from desolate stars, there were also dead stars. The two were similar in nature, but there were some differences. A dead star might have originally been a realm with vitality, but due to various reasons, the vitality had been extinguished, and all life had been extinguished. That was why it was called a dead star. Hence, the biggest difference between the two was that many dead stars had traces of civilization. Even if there was no civilization, there would still be traces left behind by life. On the other hand, there was nothing on a desolate star. On the desolate star that Lu Yi landed on, wild winds howled and waves rose hundreds of feet high and the sky was dark. This kind of environment was undoubtedly very harsh for mortals, but for Lu Yi, it was still a foothold. The main thing was that he could heal here, so he did not have to worry about being hit by the meteorites that could be seen everywhere in the starry sky. He took out a spirit jade and stuffed it into his mouth, then took out a bottle of recovery spirit pills from Tang Jun's storage ring, and refined them as he healed. This time, his injuries were not on the surface but on the internal organs. When Tang Jun's power passed through his body, it caused great damage to his physical body, and it was not easy to recover. After a full half a month, as his injuries were all healed, Lu Yi suddenly had a strange feeling. With the birth of this feeling, his flesh and blood quickly wriggled, as if it was glowing with new vitality, and he was more energetic than before. And this strange vitality was not only reflected in his flesh and blood. Lu Yi felt that his bones seemed to be soaked in this vitality as well. He was slightly startled, and then he understood. He had broken through. He was no longer in the early stage of the constellation realm, but the middle stage of the constellation realm. The cultivation of the constellation realm was mainly the refinement of one's own essence. The early stage was the essence of the flesh and blood, the middle stage was the essence of the bone marrow, and the late stage was the essence of the organs. In the cultivation process of every constellation realm, the goal was extremely clear, from shallow to deep. Hence, the breakthrough and advancement of the constellation realm did not have any abnormalities, and was always when the time was right, success would follow naturally. Calculating the time, it had been less than 3 years since he ascended to the constellation realm. To be able to advance to the middle stage in such a short time, the talent tree played a huge role. Without the talent tree, his cultivation efficiency would not be so terrifying. The experience on the immortal spirit peak was also a kind of help. At that time he had refined a portion of Su Yuqing's power. To Su Yuqing that portion of power was very little, but to Lu Yi it was a considerable improvement. Refining Tang Jun's power in the insect path should be the final step. By the same logic, Tang Jun might not have lost much power, but it was enough for Lu Yi to cross the gap between the early stage and the middle stage. Chapter 1378. The ascension of the constellation realm was a gradual and silent improvement, a result of the accumulation of sand over a long period of cultivation. Therefore, the ascension of each minor realm wouldn't bring about any earth-shattering changes to the cultivator. Take Lu Yi for example. He could feel that his strength was much stronger than it was in the early stages, but he didn't have the same feeling of transcendence as before when he crossed a major realm. In the end, it was just an advancement of the same realm. If there was a difference, it was probably that Lu Yi did not have to worry about physical injuries in the future. In the past, his physique was strong and his qi and blood were vigorous, so his physical injuries recovered faster than others. But now, any physical injuries could be healed with just a thought because he had tempered the essence of his flesh and blood to the extreme. Of course, this kind of recovery would also consume his own strength. After breaking free and advancing to the middle stage of the constellation state, Lu Yi was in a good mood. He did not stay on this desolate star for long and rushed into the starry sky again. He had to hurry back to Wuxia continent to take a look. Although he felt that after the battle, the constellations of the 9 states would most likely choose to leave the Wuxia continent and would not lose their minds to track his and Tang Jun's whereabouts, he had to take a look to be sure. Moreover, now that he had reached an agreement with Tang Jun, the constellations of the Qingli Dao world would not invade the Wuxia continent in the future. The Jianghu and Shanghai that had been scattered by the 9 states could return to Wuxia continent to gain experience. For them, that was the only way to quickly gain military merits. How to go back was a problem for Lu Yi. If he had the star map of this starry sky, he could naturally follow the map. But without the star map, he could only follow some of his previous memories. Fortunately, Lu Yi's sense of direction had always been good. After half a day, he returned to the previous location of the insect path, where he had separated from Tang Jun. Recalling the scene of the insect path that day, Lu Yi quickly determined a direction. If he was not mistaken, as long as he flew in this direction, he should be able to find the Wuxia continent. As long as he found the Wuxia continent, it would be easy to return to the 9 states. Along the way, Lu Yi gradually frowned. He felt that he seemed to be going in the wrong direction. When he was chased by Tang Jun, although he did not have the time or the mind to look at the stars around him, he still had some impression of them. However, after flying for several days, he didn't feel the slightest sense of familiarity with the stars around him. It was as if he had entered an extremely unfamiliar starry sky. Lu Yi immediately realized that he was in trouble. Once lost in the starry sky, it would be difficult to find the way back. Just as he was trying his best to distinguish the stars around him and compare them with the memories in his mind, a wisp of killing intent suddenly bloomed. In the next moment, a meteorite that passed by him exploded with a loud bang, and a vigorous figure charged out from it, a cold light shooting straight at his face. Lu Yi had never thought that someone would ambush him in such a place, and subconsciously thought that it was Tang Jun who had gone back on his word. But very soon he realized that something was amiss, because the person who had attacked him was only at the middle stage of the constellation realm. Change source app. Faced with the sudden attack, he instinctively wanted to retreat. However, before he could do anything, a violent aura blasted from behind him. From the feedback of his perception, he could tell that this was a powerful spell. A pincer attack. Not only that, but there was also a third person who had activated the power of a spirit treasure from the side. The spirit treasure was a large net, and when it spread out, it covered the sky and covered the earth. This was clearly a premeditated attack. Otherwise, the cooperation between the 3 of them would not be so exquisite. The first to attack him was a weapon cultivator. When he attacked, he attracted his attention. The spell cultivator cast a spell from behind to assist him, making it difficult for Lu Yi to advance or retreat. The third person activated the large net spirit treasure. In this way, if Lu Yi delayed or hesitated, he might be hit by the spirit treasure net. At that time, his life and death would not be under his control. The three of them worked together seamlessly. It was undoubtedly not the first time they had done something like this. Faced with such a situation, Lu Yi only had one choice. Almost at the instant he sensed the spell attack from behind, the mountain pan saber was already unsheathed. His figure flashed and he charged towards the weapon cultivator in front of him. The weapon cultivator had a long spear in his hand, and it emitted a cold light. Seeing Lu Yi charging towards him, he couldn't help but secretly praise him. Unbearably, he was taken down by the three of them in a fluster. He had never met such a decisive person before. However, it was obvious that the other party had made a mistake in choosing him as the breakthrough point. Among the three of them he was the strongest. Now he was only a step away from the late-stage constellation realm. On the other hand, the other two spell cultivators were at the mid-stage constellation realm, while the third was only at the early stage. The long spear trembled, and it turned into a cold light that spread out in front of him. In the next moment, the weapon cultivator's expression changed abruptly. As the cold light disappeared, a figure brazenly broke through his attack and attacked him in the blink of an eye. Then saber light flashed continuously like falling snowflakes. The weapon cultivator could only block the first few slashes before he was completely flustered. The speed and power of the other party's saber were not something he could contend against. The weapon cultivator was shocked. They were both at the mid-stage constellation realm. How could the difference be so great? After 2 breaths, Lu Yi brushed past the weapon cultivator's figure. The spell attack had already arrived, and a huge ball of light exploded, drowning the battlefield. Then, the big net spirit treasure also covered over, binding an area of the sky. The chaotic fluctuations of spiritual power gradually calmed down, and the light faded. When the spell cultivator looked carefully, his eyelids could not help but twitch. That was because there was only the figure of his companion in the big net spirit treasure. The weapon cultivator they had ambushed had already disappeared. What made him even more shocked was that his companion had already been beheaded. He had kicked an iron plate. The spell cultivator was also a decisive person. Realizing that he had provoked someone he should not have, he immediately turned around to escape. However, at this moment, an ordinary and powerless imperial equipment suddenly swept past him. When he turned around to look, his vision blurred, and a young man with a cold expression suddenly appeared in front of him. Who else could it be but the weapon cultivator they had ambushed? This person appeared like a ghost. The spell cultivator did not even understand how he appeared. In his shock, he hurriedly urged his spiritual power to use his technique. However, how could Lu Yi give him this chance? He raised his hand and slashed down with his saber. How could a spell cultivator who was so close to a weapon cultivator have a good ending? Especially since Lu Yi had just advanced to mid-stage constellation realm and was much stronger than before. After breaking through his protective spiritual power with 1 slash and beheading him with 1 slash, Lu Yi raised his head and looked in the direction of the last person. This guy was rather quick-witted. Seeing that his 2 companions had died one after another, he did not even care about his big net spirit treasure and desperately urged his spiritual power to escape into the distance. When Lu Yi looked over, he had already escaped a few hundred kilometers away, and his speed was increasing. Lu Yi's body was surrounded by a bloody light. Activating the blood escape technique, he turned into a bloody line and chased after that person. More than a month ago, he was still chased by Tang Jun to the point that he could not stop. A month later he was chasing after someone else. However, this person's luck was not very good. Not long after escaping, he crashed into a meteorite. When the meteorite shattered, this person was also dizzy from the impact. His face was covered in blood, and he no longer had the strength to escape. This was the hidden danger of flying faster than one's own speed in the starry sky. Lu Yi rushed over and did not make any threatening movements. He just looked at him quietly. This person knew that there was no way to escape, so he did not do anything useless. His face was full of bitterness. Looking at this person up close, he looked evil and was not a good person. His face was extremely pale. This paleness should not be the result of hitting the meteorite just now, but it was originally like this. It was quite a feeling of excessive indulgence. After a while, Lu Yi slowly said, "I ask, you answer. Understand?" "Understood." The pale-faced man kept nodding. His 2 middle-stage companions were like little chicks in front of this person. They were almost killed without the power to fight back. He also knew what kind of person he had provoked. He secretly speculated that this person in front of him was most likely a demon from a top region. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to have such strong strength. Facing such an existence, the pale-faced man had a natural sense of fear. Coupled with the fact that the situation was not good, how could he dare to resist? Qinglidao world? Lu Yi said. The only person who would ambush him could only be someone from the Qinglidao world. Was it because Tang Jun did not convey the previous agreement, or the other party did not intend to reconcile with the 9 regions at all? Lu Yi had to figure this out. Bing or QQ browser searched for the 3 Excellencies Plus book titles every day. However, what Lu Yi did not expect was that the other party shook his head. Oh. Lu Yi frowned. Which region are you from? Ancient Cold World. Never heard of it. He had never heard of it before, but it was normal for there to be many realms within the same galaxy. Before he came into contact with the people from the Qinglidao world, the 9 states did not know about the existence of the Qinglidao world. The 9 states must be in more than one galaxy. Where is the ancient Cold World? Lu Yi asked again. The ancient Cold World is in the Dongsu galaxy. Lu Yi was stunned. Suddenly he had an extremely bad feeling in his heart. Could it be that this is the Dongsu galaxy? Otherwise, how could he have met someone from the ancient Cold World? The direction in his memory was obviously right, but why were the celestial bodies he encountered along the way extremely strange? This was not a problem of him being in the wrong direction at all. This was a problem of him coming to a strange galaxy. Insect path. He used the core of the void beast to escape. He thought that he had returned to the place where he had fallen. Now it seemed that was not the case at all. He should have come to the other end of the insect path. Even with Lu Ye's strong will, his body could not help but tremble. This was too troublesome. This is not the Dongsu galaxy. The pale-faced man looked at Lu Yi with a strange expression. He did not understand why Lu Yi did not know where he was when he was already here. Then where is this? Lu Yi asked with a trace of hope and anxiety. This is the Wanxiang galaxy. His hope was completely shattered. Chapter 1379. The vast starry sky was boundless and limitless. Since ancient times, cultivators had divided the boundless starry sky into many galaxies in order to accurately determine their location. The starry sky was a whole, and the galaxies were part of it, just like how the military province was to Jianghu. Lu Yi was not clear about the specific standards for the division of galaxies, but he knew that the galaxy where Jianghu was located was called the Jade Conch Galaxy. He had learned this information when he was reading the jade slips in the Shiyuan pavilion of the human clan. Later, he had confirmed it when he spied on Sun Ying's soul. The name of a galaxy basically depended on the most powerful realm in the galaxy. It was named after the most powerful realm in the galaxy. In the Jade Conch Galaxy where Jianghu was located, there was a Jade Conch boundary. It was the strongest realm in this galaxy, much stronger than the Qinglidao world. If Jianghu could one day rise above the Jade Conch boundary and become the boss of the galaxy, it would be qualified to change the galaxy's name to Jianghu. Just like the Dongshu galaxy mentioned by the white-faced man, there was a high probability that there was a realm similar to the Dongshu realm. Of course, not all galaxies were named according to this standard. There were always some exceptions. Just like the Wanxiang galaxy. Lu Yi had no impression of the Dongshu galaxy mentioned by the white-faced man. Although the information recorded in the Shiyuan pavilion was vast and varied, there were always some omissions. He was sure that he had not seen any records about the Dongshu galaxy in the Shiyuan pavilion. However, he had seen records about the Wanxiang galaxy. This was because this galaxy was very famous. It was a place where cultivators from all over gathered. It could be said that this place was the center of hundreds and thousands of galaxies around it. The biggest reason why this place was so grand was because of the insect path. Insect paths were everywhere in the starry sky. Other galaxies might have them, but there would not be many of them. However, the Wanxiang galaxy was different. There were hundreds and thousands of insect paths here, and most of them were safe for people to pass through. One end of these insect paths was in the Wanxiang galaxy, while the other end was connected to other galaxies. As a result, it was easy for cultivators from other galaxies to travel to and from the Wanxiang galaxy. No one knew why this place was so special. However, this galaxy had been like this since ancient times. It could only be said that it was the work of nature. When Lu Yi had seen the records of the myriad phenomenon galaxy in Rest Abyss Pavilion, he had even thought that if he had the chance one day he would definitely come here to take a look. He never thought that this opportunity would come so abruptly that he wasn't prepared at all and suddenly came here. It was laughable that he thought he was still in the Jade Conch Galaxy and wanted to find a way back to Wushuang or the 9 prefectures. Change source app. They had already run to another star system, so how could they find their way home? The pale-faced man came from the K-Void galaxy, while his two companions came from other galaxies. They came from different backgrounds, but because they had similar temperaments, they had teamed up to hide in the vicinity and rob people. Lu Yi had been so focused on comparing her surroundings with her own memories that she had let down her guard, allowing her to be ambushed. When the three of them joined forces, they had also carefully chosen their opponents. They didn't dare to provoke those who were in a group because they wouldn't be able to defeat those who were too strong. Lu Yi was alone, and his cultivation was neither high nor low. He was undoubtedly their best choice. Before this, they had already succeeded several times. Who would have thought that this robbery would fail and they would be killed instead? They were really unlucky. Dao brother, what else do you want to ask? The pale-faced man saw Lu Ye's uncertain expression and felt uneasy. Lu Yi looked up at him. Do you have any friends nearby? The pale-faced man pretended to be calm. No. Then why are you stalling for time? When Lu Ye's voice fell, the mountain blade had already slashed out. The pale-faced man immediately shouted and madly urged his spiritual power to activate his protective spiritual treasure. However, he was still a step too late, mainly because he didn't expect Lu Yi to suddenly kill him while he was still asking questions. He was indeed stalling for time and he had already sent out the message. Their group had more than 3 people and there were 3 teams. The other 2 teams were nearby and he didn't need to stall for too long. He only needed an incense stick's worth of time, and his companions would rush over after receiving the news. However, he didn't expect Lu Yi to see through him. He just felt that this guy was a bit strange, being so cooperative in a life-and-death situation. Normal people would either fight to the death or beg for mercy, but this guy answered all of his questions without begging for mercy. This was clearly abnormal. He was already in the constellation realm, so he wasn't someone those inexperienced Cloud River True Lake cultivators could compare to. Moreover, since his opponent had already attacked him, he naturally wouldn't show mercy. Blood spurted out, and the pale-faced man followed in his companion's footsteps. Lu Yi put away his storage ring and lowered his head to look at his mountain blade. He frowned slightly when he saw cracks crisscrossing the blade. When it rains, it pours. Misfortune seeks out the unfortunate. It was one thing for him to accidentally enter the myriad phenomenon galaxy, but the mountain blade was also a bit overwhelmed. This was caused by the red talisman's power. Activating the red talisman's power put too much pressure on the mountain blade. At the time, he felt that there was something wrong with his blade, but he didn't have the time to investigate. Just now, he had used the blade to kill 2 people, so the problem was even more serious. His figure flickered and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already at the place where the weapon cultivator had died. After killing the enemy, he had to seize the spoils of war. This wasn't something he would forget, so he purposely left his Imperial artifact here so that he could collect it when he returned. Similarly, there was also an Imperial artifact next to the dead weapon cultivator. Not long after Lu Yi finished packing up and left, 2 groups of people rushed from different directions to the place where the pale-faced man had died. However, they were still a step too late. Even if they wanted to investigate, they didn't know where to start. Moreover, this group of people came from different galaxies and even different races. They had only gathered for their own interests and didn't have much friendship between them. Who would insist on avenging the dead? In the starry sky, Lu Yi was alone, holding 3 star maps in his hands. These were the star maps of the Wanxiang galaxy. The 3 people he had killed each had a copy. After comparing them, it could be seen that these 3 star maps were more or less the same, but there were some subtle differences. This was normal. Star maps were not like the maps in the domain. The positions of the various celestial bodies in the starry sky would often change. Perhaps powerful cultivators would destroy the celestial bodies in battle, or perhaps new celestial bodies would be born. Since the time of obtaining the star maps was different, the details would naturally be different. However, each one could be used. With this star map, Lu Yi could go to any place in the Wanxiang galaxy without worrying about getting lost. After a careful inspection, he confirmed his current location. He was roughly at the outskirts of the Wanxiang galaxy. He wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. Instead, he returned along the path he had come from and carefully memorized his current location according to the star maps. A few days later, Lu Yi finally returned to the insect path. The reason he returned was naturally to record the exact location of the insect path. At present, this insect path was his only hope of returning to the Jade Conch galaxy. However, this insect path wasn't stable yet, so he couldn't pass through it. From afar, Lu Yi saw a person standing in front of the insect path, seemingly in melancholy and contemplation. Lu Ye's expression brightened, and his original depression suddenly dissipated a lot. If there was anything in this world that could make him happy when he was unlucky, it was meeting a fellow who was equally unlucky. It seemed that all the depression in his heart had been shared. That person also noticed Lu Ye's arrival and turned his head to look at him. When their eyes met, they could see the helplessness in each other's eyes. "Little friend Tai Bai." Tang Jun nodded slightly. Lu Yi flew forward, not too wary of this old man. They were all in the same boat, so there was no need to make things difficult for each other. "Old Tang, since you're here, do you realize the seriousness of the problem?" Lu Yi asked. "It seems that you've realized it too." Tang Jun sighed. "I didn't expect to have the opportunity to come to a galaxy like this in my lifetime. I've long heard of the Myriad constellation, but unfortunately I've never had the chance to see it. Great, now that I'm old I have to travel so far away." He knew this was the Myriad constellation not because he had the same experience as Lu Yi, but because it was the Moon Jade realm. Normally no one dared to provoke it, but if he encountered a cultivator from another galaxy, he would know his situation after asking around. Lu Yi said decisively, "It's my fault, it's my fault." Tang Jun shook his head. "It's fate, there's no one to blame." Lu Yi said, "Old Tang, did you come here to return through the insect path?" "This old man wants to go back. I'm old, so I want to return to my roots. Who would want to wander outside? However, the insect path is unstable right now, so it's not appropriate to rashly venture deeper. We were lucky to be able to come here through the insect path. If we try again we might not be able to reach the other end of the insect path. No one knows where we'll end up. If we end up in some remote place the situation will only worsen." Lu Yi nodded. "I think so too. It was just a coincidence that they broke through the spatial barrier with the help of the Void Beast's core and arrived here. This kind of coincidence could not be controlled by humans. Just as Tang Jun said, it would be terrible if they ended up in some remote place. It was better to stay here. At the very least, the insect path to the Jade Conch galaxy was here. If they were lucky maybe the insect path would stabilize after a few years. At that time the two of them could safely return to the Jade Conch galaxy." In comparison, Tang Jun was undoubtedly more eager to return to the Jade Conch galaxy. He was already old, so he did not have the drive of a young man like Lu Yi. He only wanted to live out the rest of his life in peace. In this unfamiliar environment, his adaptability was naturally not as good as Lu Ye's. "We don't have to wait for the insect path to stabilize," Tang Jun said. Lu Yi asked, "What do you think?" Tang Jun said, "There are many insect paths in the Myriad constellation that lead to many places. There must be a galaxy close to our Jade Conch galaxy. Perhaps the cultivators there have heard of the Jade Conch galaxy. We just need to gather this information and find the insect path to that galaxy. Then we can use it to return to the Jade Conch galaxy." Chapter 1380. This method was more troublesome, but it was better than waiting here for the path to stabilize. It was hard to say if the path could even stabilize. Even if it could, who knew how many years it would take? It might take a few years, a dozen years, or even hundreds or thousands of years. It was impossible to make an accurate judgment. "I heard that there's a 10,000 elephant sea here. It's a place where cultivators from all over the world gather." Tang Jun said, "We need to find someone to find out where the 10,000 elephant sea is. Let's go there first." If they wanted to gather information, it was naturally more convenient to go to a place with more people. Lu Yi casually tossed a star map to him. Tang Jun caught it and looked at it. Then he turned around and looked at Lu Yi speechlessly. The two of them had only been in the 10,000 elephant galaxy for a few days. Even Yu Yao didn't have a star map of this galaxy, but Lu Yi did. This was very thought-provoking. Moreover, judging from the way Lu Yi attacked, he probably had more than one star map. How long had it been? This brat had already started a massacre? He calmed himself down and carefully examined the star map. Then he turned around and looked in a certain direction. "It should be over there. Let's go." With that he took the lead and flew out. Lu Yi followed closely behind. After a while he said, "Old Tang, are we going to fly there like this?" Tang Jun turned to look at him. "Then why don't you carry me? I'm old and my legs are inconvenient. You're young and strong, so it's only right for you to put in more effort." Lu Yi resisted the urge to draw his saber. "Don't you have anything that can increase your speed like a planetary boat?" Tang Jun said in annoyance, "You took my storage ring. Where would I get a planetary boat?" Lu Yi didn't say anything. He just stared at him. Lu Yi didn't believe that the old man didn't have a planetary boat. Even Zhao Qianmu, who was in the late constellation realm, had a planetary boat. After flying for a while, Tang Jun probably also felt that it was a waste of time to fly there like this, so he put on a look of realization. If you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. I'm old, so my memory is really bad. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw out a planetary boat. It looked similar to a silver fish, but it wasn't as big. It could only accommodate 3 to 5 people at most. Tang Jun took the lead and boarded the boat, and Lu Yi followed closely behind him. Feel left and right. Look right now that Inu was with the Thought Moon Immortal, and he didn't have any other planetary ships with him. It would be inconvenient for him to travel in the myriad phenomenon galaxy without a companion. Old Tang, don't even think about it. This is the only one I have. Yeah, you're so old. Why would you care about such a small thing? Tang Jun laughed in exasperation. When he was fighting against Lu Yi, he only felt that this kid was ruthless, but now that they were in the same boat, he realized just how shameless he could be. Even the people of the Jade Conch Galaxy could hear the sound of the abacus. In any case, don't even think about it. I can't give it to you. Tang Jun's attitude was firm. Lu Yi curled his lips, walked to the side and sat down cross-legged. Tang Jun could still vaguely hear him saying something like stingy. Along the way, the surrounding airspace gradually became lively. From time to time, they would encounter some cultivators passing by. Some of these cultivators were flying through the air, while others were riding on spirit boats. Most of them were in groups and very few were alone. Lu Yi was dazzled by the myriad of strange shapes and sizes of the spirit boats. The further they went, the livelier the surrounding airspace became. Moreover, all the people they saw were on the constellations. Occasionally they would sense the aura of the Yuyao realm. This galaxy was really full of constellations, and there were as many Yuyao as there were dogs. The grand scene of cultivators gathering here was an eye-opener for Lu Yi and Tang Jun, who came from a remote place. And this was only the periphery of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. They wondered what kind of grand scene it would be when they entered the legendary 10,000 Elephant Sea. When there were too many people, it was easy to cause trouble, especially when the cultivators coming and going came from hundreds or thousands of different galaxies. Everyone lived on the edge of a knife, and fierce battles were unavoidable. Along the way they encountered at least a dozen battles, big and small. Tang Jun sensed them from afar and steered his star boat to avoid them. This was also common sense when traveling in the universe. If there was a battle, don't approach it rashly. Otherwise, it would easily arouse the hostility of both sides. If a group of people attacked you, the scene would not be pleasant. From afar, the two of them saw a strange scene in the starry sky. In the distant starry sky, a vast expanse of blue covered a large area, as if there was a vast ocean suspended in the starry sky. It was a magnificent sight. They had arrived at the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Although the 10,000 Elephant Sea was called a sea, it could exist in the starry sky. Naturally, it was not a real sea. According to the records in the Miniman tribe's Jade Slip, the 10,000 Elephant Sea was the first of the 3 wonders of space in the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy. It was also the origin of the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy's fame in the entire galaxy. In the vast and boundless starry sky, there were countless wonders, and each of them had a myriad of forms. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was only one of them. From afar, the 10,000 Elephant Sea did not seem very large, but as they got closer, they could feel its magnificence. Such a wonder covered an area of billions of miles. Its existence alone occupied almost a tenth of the entire 10,000 Elephant Galaxy's scale. It was obvious how huge it was. However, compared to the other wonders in the starry sky, the 10,000 Elephant Sea scale was actually not large. According to the records in the Miniman tribe's Jade Slip, some of the wonders in the starry sky could even cover an entire galaxy or several galaxies. If a constellation realm expert entered it, even if they rode a star boat like the Silver Fish, it would still take them several years to pass through it. An old man and a young man stood side by side on the star boat, feeling the oppressive feeling brought by the huge ocean from afar. Both of them were speechless for a long time. My young friend Tai Bai. Tang Jun suddenly said, I've thought about it and I think we should split up. In this way we can take care of each other in secret. Even if one of us runs into trouble, we won't be without help. What do you think, my young friend? Lu Yi pondered for a moment and said, I think what you said makes sense. Suddenly coming to this unfamiliar place where experts gathered, it was indeed not suitable for them to move together. It would be more efficient if they split up. Moreover, it was just as Tang Jun had said. If something happened to one of them, the other could secretly lend a helping hand. If they stayed together, it would be easy for them to be wiped out. Tang Jun took out his musical note and handed it to Lu Yi. Let's exchange our musical notes. It'll be easier for us to contact each other if something happens. Lu Yi did as he said. After a short while, he withdrew his musical note and leaped off the star boat. As Tang Jun's star boat sped off into the distance, his words echoed out from afar. "I'll inform you as soon as I receive any news. I'll take my leave now." Lu Yi watched as Tang Jun's star boat disappeared from his sight, and then slowly flew in the direction of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Tang Jun must have his own reasons for splitting up with him. The reason he gave was probably only part of it. The most likely reason was that he didn't want Lu Yi to get him into trouble. Tang Jun must have sensed something from the star map Lu Yi had given him. For an old man like him, who had one foot in the grave, what he pursued most was stability. It was natural that he would feel uncomfortable staying with a young man like Lu Yi, who was prone to fighting and killing. Lu Yi didn't point it out because it was indeed more effective to split up. Besides, even though the two of them were from the same galaxy and shared the same fate, their relationship wasn't good enough for them to travel together. As he flew, Lu Yi touched his right wrist. In fact, he had a way to leave the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy, and that was to activate the mark given to him by the reincarnation tree. In this way he could directly enter the reincarnation tree. At that time he could ask the reincarnation tree about the location of the 9 states, and he should be able to find the way home. If there was anyone who knew this galaxy the best, it would be the reincarnation tree. Its doppelgangers were spread all over the realms of the major galaxies, and it knew every galaxy like the back of its hand. However, Lu Yi didn't know how far the reincarnation tree was from the 9 states, and how many galaxies they would have to pass through on the way home. Even if he knew the way home, it wouldn't be worth it if it took hundreds or thousands of years. Lu Yi kept this method as a backup. In comparison, Tang Jun's suggestion was the fastest. He could scout out the galaxies adjacent to the Jade Conch galaxy, and then use their insect paths to travel. This way he could return faster. After flying for a few more days, he gradually approached the 10,000 Elephant Sea. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was a three-dimensional existence. To some extent, Lu Yi could enter it from any direction. But in fact it wasn't that simple. The gathering of the starry sky's energy. If that was the case, then this was definitely a treasured place for upper realm cultivators to cultivate. This was because upper realm cultivators needed to absorb and refine the starry sky's energy. Spirit jades and spirit crystals could be seen as the condensation of the starry sky's energy. However, the 10,000 Elephant Sea's water didn't just contain the starry sky's energy that was useful to cultivators. As a starry sky wonder that had been born since ancient times, it had its own unique rules that operated. Simply put, the seawater here was far more corrosive than the usual starry sky's energy. Even upper realm cultivators couldn't resist this kind of corrosion. Therefore, if one rashly entered the sea, even upper realm cultivators wouldn't be able to withstand it for too long. Once too many impurities were corroded in the body, it would inevitably affect one's foundation. If it was light, one's vitality would be greatly damaged, and if it was heavy, one's cultivation would drop. As a result, even though the vast 10,000 Elephant Sea gathered the starry sky's energy that upper realm cultivators coveted, no one dared to enter it. Cultivators entered the 10,000 Elephant Sea from the sky. Lu Yi flew in from the edge of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. From afar he saw the scattered islands on the surface of the sea. These islands were born at the same time as the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Each island could withstand the corrosion of the seawater for countless years. It could be said that they were incomparably sturdy. Even sunshine powerhouses couldn't easily destroy them. Cultivators from the 4 galaxies used these islands as their foundation. Over countless years, the cultivators here had maintained the prosperity of this place from generation to generation. Chapter 1381. The number of islands on the 10,000 Elephant Sea could be estimated by looking at the scene before him. There were probably tens of thousands of islands floating on the vast sea. Some of the islands were more like reefs floating on the sea surface than islands. They were several feet wide and could be overlooked if one did not examine them carefully. Most of them were small islands like this, and these small islands and reefs were not marked on the star map. There were also many islands marked on the star map, each with their own names. These named islands were all places where cultivators gathered and were also resources that various parties fought over. Lu Yi saw some familiar names on these islands. For example, Yellow Dragon Island, Five Color Island, Myriad Demon Island, Winged Sky Island, and so on. These islands were named after the top realms. Only those top domains had the right to occupy an island in this place where all the heroes gathered. Some of the islands were named after galaxies. For example, Cave Void Island, Great Chin Island, and Tiger Leap Island. The owners of these islands did not have the foundation of a top realm and could not occupy an island alone. However, cultivators from different realms in the same galaxy could unite and occupy an island. There were also some random names whose origins could not be determined. The origins of the owners could not be verified. Lu Yi could feel the undercurrents of this place just by looking at the names of the various islands on the star map. In fact, this was indeed the case. Not long after he entered the 10,000 Elephant Sea, he saw a large group of cultivators besieging an island in the distance. The protective array on the island flickered under the attack of colorful lights. No one knew how long it could last. This was undoubtedly a fight between two groups of cultivators for the ownership of the island. Most of the cultivators involved were constellations. There were also Yuyao, but there were not many of them. There were only 3 to 5 of them. Sunshine Realm cultivators could not be seen in this fight. This was because there were only a few Sunshine Realm cultivators in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Foreign Sunshine Realm cultivators were not allowed to stay in the 10,000 Elephant Sea for long, let alone participate in the fight. The main reason was that once a Sunshine Realm cultivator made a move, it would cause too much of a commotion and it would be difficult to clean up the mess. The experts of the major galaxies were also willing to abide by this rule. This was the method the local Sunshine Realm cultivators used to control the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Even the Yu Yao of the various galaxies had a limited number of places to enter the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Not all Yu Yao could come here. Lu Yi had checked all of this information in the jade slips of the lesser human tribe. Normally speaking, there were no restrictions on the lunar constellations coming here, nor would they be subject to any checks. They could come and go as they pleased. However, if Yu Yao came here, she would first have to report to the local star system's Rizhao and explain her origins. Only then would she be allowed to stay. Therefore, Lu Yi guessed that Tang Jun was currently being interrogated by Nicho of the Vientiane galaxy. As for whether or not Tang Jun would reveal his existence during the interrogation process, Lu Yi did not have to worry. Nicho of the Vientiane galaxy was only responsible for overseeing this place and would not interfere. At their level of cultivation, they were too lazy to care about the quarrels of the cultivators below them. Referring to the star map in his hand, Lu Yi chose his destination. At the center of the Wanxiang Sea was the largest island, the Wanxiang Island. This was the foundation of the myriad phenomenon galaxy's local cultivators. Since it was the largest, it was bound to be the liveliest place. He needed to gather information and deal with some other matters. Naturally, he would choose a place like this. He also wanted to familiarize himself with the Wanxiang Island. There were many cultivators coming and going, and they came from all kinds of strange races. Some looked like uncivilized demons, some did not look human at all, and some did not even have a specific shape. Lu Yi had seen many big scenes before, but he still clicked his tongue in wonder at this moment. He skimmed across the sea, avoiding one island after another as he slowly approached the Wanxiang Island. At this speed, Lu Yi estimated that it would take him about half a month to reach the Wanxiang Island. He felt very helpless. Just as he was hurrying on with his journey, a stream of light suddenly flew over from the side. Lu Yi had been in a state of alert all this time. When he saw this, he immediately stopped and looked over coldly. The stream of light came to a sudden stop in front of him. When the light dissipated, an extremely small spirit boat appeared in Lu Ye's field of vision. This spirit boat was even smaller than Tang Jun's. Could only fit 3 people. Li said, "Greetings, Taoist brother. What's the matter?" Lu Yi pressed his hand on the hilt of the Pan Shan saber with a serious expression. The young man opposite him looked young, about the same age as him. What was rare was that he actually had an early-stage star constellation realm cultivation. This kind of person must have a good background, and his aptitude should also be good. Li did not know why he stopped him. "Taoist brother, you seem to be in a hurry. Are you hurrying to the Wanxiang Island?" The young man was still smiling, revealing his white teeth. It was easy to feel that he was harmless. Lu Yi did not let down his guard. He shook his head decisively. "No." Under normal circumstances, this kind of person who came to strike up a conversation for no reason was up to no good. Lu Yi was new here, so he naturally did not want to be entangled with them. However, the young man did not retreat. He should have encountered a similar situation before. He said skillfully, "Taoist brother, you don't need to be cautious. I am a ferryman under the Wanxiang Merchant Guild. I am responsible for transporting people like you who are in a hurry." As he said this, he pointed at the side of his ship. Lu Yi looked over. Sure enough, he saw the words Wanxiang written in large letters there. The young man pointed in another direction. "Taoist brother, please take a look. This is what we ferrymen do. It is mainly to make it more convenient for those who don't have a ship to travel between the big islands and save time." Lu Yi turned his head again and saw a ship that was exactly the same as the one the young man was on. It also had the words Wanxiang written on the side of the ship, and there were cultivators riding it. He had noticed the existence of this kind of ship before. Moreover, there was not just one but several of them. He had thought that this kind of small ship was popular here, but now it seemed that this was not the case. This ship was specially used to ferry people. The so-called Wanxiang Merchant Guild was very thoughtful. After all, the number of cultivators who owned a ship was very small. The production cost of this thing was very high, and ordinary star constellation realm cultivators could not afford it. Even if they could afford it, they might not be able to bear to buy one. After all, star constellation realm cultivators also needed spirit jades to cultivate. However, Lu Yi knew that this thing was definitely not free. They would probably charge a certain amount of money. How much? Lu Yi asked. The young man replied with a smile, "It depends on where you are going. We ferrymen charge according to the distance. To the island of Wanxiang. 10 spirit jades please." Lu Yi raised his eyebrows. This price was not expensive. His figure flashed and he landed on the ship. He took out 10 spirit jades and handed them to the young man. The young man took the spirit jades and his mood became cheerful. "Brother, please stand still." With that, he turned the ship around and flew toward the island of Wanxiang. On the way, Lu Yi asked, "How did you know I was going to the island of Wanxiang?" The young man replied with a smile, "Because I saw that this should be your first time in the Wanxiang Sea. Let me put it this way. If you knew a little about this place, you would have taken the initiative to look for us ferrymen. Since you didn't, either you are embarrassed or you don't know anything about this place. I see that you have an extraordinary temperament, and you don't seem to be a person who is reluctant to part with a few spirit jades. This should be your first time in the Wanxiang Sea. Most of the people who come here for the first time will choose to go to the island of Wanxiang. We ferrymen have seen many people, so naturally we can see some clues." While explaining, he flattered Lu Yi without leaving a trace. Lu Yi had to admit that he was good at talking when doing business, and he was also very observant. "Brother, is it convenient for you to leave a musical imprint?" The young man continued, "Next time if Daoist brother wants to go somewhere, feel free to call me. I'm usually working in the Myriad Sea, so even if I'm not free, I can call a nearby brother to receive you at the location you designate." Lu Yi naturally had no reason to refuse such a convenient offer. He immediately exchanged musical imprints with the young man. The young man introduced himself again, and Lu Yi learned that his name was Fang Wanli. "If I want to go somewhere outside the Wanxiang Sea, will you ferrymen escort me?" Lu Yi asked. Fang Wanli smiled and said, "As long as you are in the Wanxiang Galaxy, there is no place that we ferrymen can't reach. Also, as long as you are on the way, the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce will be responsible for your safety. There will be no accidents." The confidence in his words also showed the powerful background of the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce. "If it's convenient, tell me more about the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce." Lu Yi took out a few more spirit jades and handed them over. Fang Wanli happily took them and thanked him. Then he began to talk tirelessly. After his explanation, Lu Yi finally understood the roots of the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce. It could be said that the Chamber of Commerce was the largest and most powerful force in the entire Wanxiang Galaxy. Although it was named Wanxiang, it was not just an industry in the Wanxiang Galaxy. It was a colossus formed by the local forces of the Wanxiang Galaxy, with the participation of all the major top domains. The participation of these external forces was not deep. For example, the famous Yellow Dragon domain had a sunshine powerhouse in the Chamber of Commerce. He could not interfere with the normal operations of the Chamber of Commerce, but if there was a big problem, the Chamber of Commerce had the right to ask this sunshine powerhouse for help. Correspondingly, the Chamber of Commerce would send some spirit jades as offerings every year. It might not be a lot, but no one would refuse such a free gift. On the surface, the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce only had a few sunshine powerhouses overseeing the Wanxiang Sea and presiding over the various operations of the Chamber of Commerce, but in reality, they had the secret support of the major top domains, or rather, checks and balances between them. The internal situation was quite complicated and could not be explained in a few words. This was also the reason why the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce had been able to control the Myriad Elephant Sea for countless years and become the most powerful force here. They had tied all the top domains to themselves. This kind of binding might not be firm, but none of the top domains were willing to give up. It was undoubtedly a very clever method. Chapter 1382. There's one more thing that you need to know. Fang Wanli spoke excitedly. He was willing to tell Lu Yi more because of the few pieces of spiritual jades. What is it? Ordinary foreign cultivators who do not have a pass will have to pay a fee to enter the island of versatility. Of course the fee is not much, only 5 pieces. Brother, you should be able to afford it. 5 pieces is not a small amount, Lu Yi said calmly. Although he did not think it was a lot when he paid 10 pieces of spiritual jades for the ferry, that was because he had a good family background. If it were a normal cultivator who had just entered the starry sky, 1 piece of spiritual jade would be enough. They would not be willing to use it to travel, and would most likely prefer to fly slowly to the island of versatility. The main reason is because there are too many cultivators coming to and from the island of versatility. If there were no restrictions, the island of versatility would be overcrowded. Charging 5 pieces of spiritual jades as a passage fee would greatly reduce the number of people entering the island of versatility. This was indeed the case. Everyone liked to go to crowded places, and the constellations were no exception. If there were no restrictions, then the cultivators who came here would most likely gather at the island of versatility. In the early stages of collecting entry fees, many people who did not need to go to the island of versatility would not go there. There are also some spiritual islands that are open to the public. They will also charge different amounts of spiritual jades. Brother, you need to find out more before you go. However, most of the spiritual islands are not open to the public. They are the private lands of different factions. Brother, you need to be careful. Do not enter rashly and be treated as an intruder. How do you differentiate them? Lu Yi asked humbly. Brother, you can go to the Chamber of Commerce and buy a star map. These spiritual islands are marked on the map, but the colors of the words are different. If it is red, it is a private land that is not open to the public. If it is white, it is open to the public. Only now did Lu Yi know that the colors of the words marked on the star map were very particular. When he checked the star map previously, he did find that the names of the spiritual islands were divided into white and red. However, he did not understand the mystery behind it. There were a lot of cultivators traveling back and forth. Lu Yi discovered another interesting thing. The flying altitude of your ferries is lower than the flying altitude of the cultivators? Fang Wanli hurriedly nodded his head. Taoist brother's observation is very detailed, it is indeed so. Although there are no rules on the surface, everyone has been willing to abide by them for so many years. The main reason is that the speed of the ferry is too fast. If it is mixed with the crowd, it is very easy to collide with them. Taoist brother has also seen that there are many cultivators traveling in the sky above the 10,000 elephant sea. The ferries won't collide with each other? What about the planetary boats of other cultivators? Both the star boat and the star boat have detection spell formations that allow them to sense each other's presence in advance. Lu Yi nodded. This was similar to how a star boat could sense the obstacles ahead of it with the help of teleportation portals. Upon closer inspection, Lu Yi noticed something else. Normally, the planetary boats driven by cultivators wouldn't fly directly over a spiritual island. Most of them would take a detour, probably to avoid any misunderstandings. However, the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce's ferry didn't seem to care about this at all. It didn't matter if it was a big island or a small one, they would just fly past it. The spiritual islands on the 10,000 elephant sea were of different sizes. Looking down from the sky, they were like chess pieces that adorned the surface of the sea. This reminded Lu Yi of the chess sea. That was the first time he had worked together with Wuxia. They had killed countless enemies. It was also that battle that made him realize that the medical cultivators of his clan were not simple. After half a day, a huge spiritual island came into view. Along the way, Lu Yi had seen many large spiritual islands. However, none of them could be compared to the one in front of him. In terms of size, this spiritual island was undoubtedly the overlord of the entire 10,000 elephant sea. This was undoubtedly the 10,000 elephant island. The buildings on the island were arranged in an orderly manner. At the center of the island stood a group of palaces. A huge pagoda-like building stood at the center of the island. With the pagoda as the source, the streets spread out in all directions in an orderly manner. Fang Wanli steered the ferries to the edge of the spiritual island. He stopped at a place that looked like a ferry and said to Lu Yi with a smile, "Brother, once you've arrived, you'll be able to fly freely after paying the entrance fee to enter the 10,000 elephant island. However, you're not allowed to fight on the island. Please remember this." Lu Yi nodded his head slightly and took a step forward, arriving at the ferry. There weren't too many experts guarding the port. There was only a white-haired old man who was lying on an armchair with his eyes closed. He seemed to be in a leisurely mood. There was a table beside him. On the left side of the table, there were some mystical jades that were dazzling to the eyes. On the right side of the table there were pitch-black badges. There were a few people in front of Lu Yi, who had just arrived and were preparing to enter the 10,000 Elephant Island. They seemed to be a group. One of the middle-aged men glanced at the old man and said, "Mr. Bai, I'll take it myself?" Judging from his words, it was obvious that it was not his first time on the 10,000 Elephant Island, as he was very familiar with the place. Mr. Bai, who was lying on the wooden armchair, did not even lift his eyelids. He waved his hands slightly as if he was too lazy to entertain the man. The middle-aged man took out 20 mystical jades and placed them on the table. He then took out 4 badges and distributed them to the people around him. He then brought his fists together toward Mr. Bai, and led his companions into the 10,000 Elephant Island. They flew into the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After seeing this, Lu Yi followed suit and took out 5 mystical jades, exchanging them for a badge. As he was about to enter the island, Mr. Bai suddenly opened his eyes slightly and glanced at him before he calmly said, "The badge must be worn on your body. You are not allowed to store it in your storage ring or other storage space. It will be useless if you leave the island. You can leave the island from any direction, but you have to enter the island from the ferry." It was obvious that he knew it was Lu Ye's first time here, thus he decided to explain the rules to him. Lu Yi had already learned about it when he was chatting with Feng Wanli. He brought his fists together as a sign of thanks for the advice, and set foot on the 10,000 Elephant Island. He was not in a rush to leave, but turned around to observe the situation. Behind him, more people arrived one after another and took their badges. Mr. Bai still had his eyes closed, showing no interest in the matter. No one dared to take the 5 mystical jades as the entrance fee. Lu Ye's eyes were filled with envy. 5 mystical jades were not much in comparison. One could easily find 5 mystical jades in a suitable location in the star constellation. However, if it was 5 mystical jades for one person, what about 10 people, 100 or even 10,000? This tiny ferry is definitely a treasure trove filled with mystical jades. Judging from the frequency of cultivators entering and leaving the island, this ferry would bring more than 10,000 mystical jades to the 10,000 Elephant Island every day, and there must be more than one ferry like this. There might even be 10 or 20 of them. However, no matter how envious he was, this was still a way for others to make money. Lu Yi suddenly had an idea. If he could obtain a mystical island here and then find a way to attract cultivators, turning his mystical island into a place where cultivators would come in and out, and then collect a certain amount of entrance fees, wouldn't he be able to make a fortune? This idea only lingered in his mind for a moment before disappearing. Not to mention how difficult it was to obtain a mystical island. Even if he could obtain one, he might not be able to keep it. Even if he could keep it, what could he use to attract cultivators? So many top domains had their own mystical islands here, they must have thought of this before. After a while, Lu Yi walked towards the island. After a while, he stood in the middle of an extremely spacious street, looking at the rows of shops on both sides, and suddenly had the illusion that he had returned to the 9 regions. In the cloudy river battlefield, the Qinji cities were as lively as this. However, in terms of scale, the Qinji cities could not be compared to this place. The value of the goods sold in the shops in the cloudy river battlefield could not be compared to the goods here. The forces behind these shops included the domains of many galaxies. It could be said that any cultivator could buy goods from the entire galaxy here. They were not afraid of running out of goods, but they were afraid of not having enough spiritual jades. Lu Yi had just arrived and wanted to broaden his horizons, so he casually entered a shop with the sign, "Wonderful Pill Shop." This was obviously a place that sold mystical pills. Due to the limited resources of the 9 regions, it was still difficult to refine mystical pills that were beneficial to the cultivation of constellations. However, this situation would gradually improve. When the 9 regions could nurture higher quality spiritual flowers and herbs, they would naturally have the qualifications to refine the corresponding mystical pills. Of course, the alchemists of the 9 regions first had to solve the problem of pill recipes. The interior of the Wonderful Pill Shop was extremely spacious, and the interior decoration was also very neat and tidy. When Lu Yi entered, a young and beautiful lady was in charge of receiving him. What surprised him was that this lady only had the cultivation of the deity C level. He thought that the cultivators who came here were all above the constellation level. After all, the environment of the Wanxiang Sea was not suitable for cultivators below the constellation level. There was no difference between this place and the galaxy. There was drifting energy of the galaxy everywhere. A cultivator of the deity C level was not strong enough to withstand such energy. However, there was a deity C level here. Lu Yi sensed for a moment and realized that there was no trace of the energy of the galaxy here. He understood that this island of versatility must be covered by an extremely intricate array. Under the isolation of this intricate array, the energy of the galaxy could not invade the island of versatility. Therefore, it was able to allow living beings below the constellation level to survive here. Thinking about it, this lady was only in charge of receiving customers and helping to sell the goods of the shop. If they really let the constellation level do this, it would be a waste of talent. If they used the true lake level, it would not be enough. The deity sea level was just right. One had to admit that the forces behind this shop were very considerate. They did not waste manpower and financial resources, nor did they make the customers feel belittled or have other unpleasant experiences. The lady's attitude was very warm, and she introduced various types of mystical pills to Lu Yi. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Lu Yi walked out of the wonderful pill shop. The lady saw him off attentively. Although Lu Yi did not buy any mystical pills, she had her own integrity and would not easily look down on any customer. Chapter 1383. Along the way, Lu Yi only observed from afar as he walked past various shops. Although the 9 prefectures had been promoted to a large realm a few years ago and could be considered to be connected to the universe, it was still just the beginning. There were many things that needed to be familiarized with slowly. For example, the various prices in the universe. The cultivators of the 9 prefectures knew nothing about them. These things were not recorded in the human tribe's resting abyss pavilion. If Lu Yi wanted to buy or sell something here, he had to first understand the prices here. Otherwise he would suffer a loss without knowing it. After shopping for nearly a day, Lu Yi had a general understanding of the prices here. He also saw some things that piqued his interest. For example, in a shop that specialized in selling star boats, he saw a small star boat that could be used by a single person. It was the cheapest star boat among all the star boats. However, even the cheapest star boat cost 20,000 spirit jades, while the larger ones cost 100 to 200,000 spirit jades. It was not something he could afford. He used to think that he was quite rich because he did not have to worry about cultivation. The spiritual jades he had were enough for him to cultivate for a long time. However, when he came to the 10,000 Elephant Sea, he realized that he was really poor. 4 cultivators, no matter how many spiritual jades they had, they would never be enough. One day later, Lu Yi stood in front of the largest pagoda in the center of the 10,000 Elephant Island. This was the symbol of the 10,000 Elephant Island and also the headquarters of the 10,000 Elephant Chamber of Commerce. With his experience in the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield, Lu Yi naturally knew that if he really wanted to buy something, he had to come to this place. The things sold here might be more expensive than outside, but the quality was guaranteed. Of course, he did not come here to buy anything. He walked in leisurely. The interior of the 10,000 Elephant Chamber of Commerce was luxuriously decorated and spacious. It was easy to feel reverence for this colossus. This was also a common method used by merchants to let their customers feel their powerful foundation. This way, no matter what kind of transaction they made later, it would be much smoother. Someone received Lu Yi and led him to a private room without asking much. After serving him tea, he left. Lu Yi took things as they came. He sipped the tea and waited quietly. He had experienced this scene many times in the 9 prefectures. Although the place was different and the cultivation level was different, the pattern was the same. Sure enough, a moment later, a smiling manager of the Chamber of Commerce came to inquire about Lu Yi's business. Lu Yi silently took out his Panshan saber and placed it in front of the person who called himself Chao Xiang. Chao Xiang smiled and apologized. He then held the Panshan saber with both hands and slowly pulled it out to take a closer look at it. As soon as he looked at it, he had an idea. He then asked warmly, "Dao friend, are you trying to repair this saber?" As a person who dealt with outsiders all year round, he had long developed a pair of extraordinary eyes for discerning people. Naturally, he could see through the details of Lu Yebing's cultivation. If a weapon cultivator took out his own spiritual treasure, it was definitely not for sale. Moreover, the cracks on the Panshan saber were obvious. He immediately saw through Lu Ye's intentions. "What price?" Lu Yi asked. Chao Xiang didn't answer immediately. Instead, he silently sensed the mountain pan saber. After a while he said, "This saber is tough and durable. Although I can't tell what ores were used to forge it, it must have been recast once. Moreover, some precious materials were added during the recasting process. It shouldn't be difficult to repair this saber. There are outstanding blacksmiths in the Chamber of Commerce who can completely repair these cracks." Lu Yi knew that Chao Xiang's asking price wouldn't be cheap, but he was still secretly speechless. However, he had to admit that Chao Xiang's eyesight was very good. Some precious materials had indeed been added to the Panshan saber when it was recast. They were all spoils of war that Lu Yi had obtained from the Alpha Origin stage. Lu Yi's expression didn't change as he indifferently said, "Spiritual treasures don't exceed 10,000. Ordinary spiritual treasures only cost 2 to 3,000 spirit jades. Even the better ones only cost around 5,000. I'm just trying to repair it. Isn't 2,000 too much?" With the information he had gathered the day before, Lu Yi more or less had some understanding of the price of spiritual treasures. Just as he said, spiritual treasures only cost 2 to 3,000 spirit jades. This was a price that constellation stage experts could afford. Chao Xiang smiled slightly. Dao friend also said that I'm just trying to repair it. To a weapon cultivator, a suitable spiritual treasure is extremely important. What's most important is that it's easy to use. Dao friend may be able to buy a spiritual treasure with 2,000 spirit jades, but how much strength can you display if you use it? This was the truth. It was likely that Lu Yi had seen through this point, which was why he dared to ask for such a high price. Lu Yi lightly tapped the table and said, "There are no restrictions in my saber. It's just a simple repair. It shouldn't be too difficult." Chao Xiang was slightly stunned. "No restrictions? You can feel it." Lu Yi raised his hand. Chao Xiang really didn't know. Although he had felt the Panshan saber earlier, he hadn't examined it too carefully in front of its owner, Lu Yi. Now that he heard Lu Yi's words, he hurriedly examined it carefully. In the end, he discovered that there were indeed no restrictions inside the saber. It was purely tough. After working in the Wuxia Chamber of Commerce for so many years, this was the first time Chao Xiang had encountered such a situation. He couldn't help but feel strange. What was a saber without any restrictions used for? It wasn't good to ask too much. After all, this was Lu Yi's private matter. There were millions of cultivators, each with their own strange hobbies and characteristics. It wasn't something he could casually inquire about. If there are no restrictions, it'll be much easier to repair it. I'll lower the price by 200 spirit jades to 1,800. 1,000. Lu Yi looked at him with a calm expression. Chao Xiang couldn't help but laugh. "Fellow Taoist, our Wuxia Chamber of Commerce has its own rules for all kinds of transactions. We can't just randomly haggle like outside." Lu Yi leisurely said, "This is my first time coming to the Wuxia Chamber of Commerce. In the future I'll surely disturb you. If it's convenient, we can exchange musical notes. If there's anything else I want to trade, I'll look for you directly." Chao Xiang hurriedly took out a musical note and handed it to Lu Yi. He beamed with joy. "Thank you for your kind intentions." Lu Yi also took out his own musical note. After the exchange, Chao Xiang gritted his teeth. 1,500, fellow Taoist. This is the lowest price I can decide. If it's any lower, we can't do business. Lu Yi knew that Chao Xiang wasn't telling the truth. However, since he was doing business, he naturally had to give Chao Xiang a bit of profit. He was afraid that he couldn't lower the price. He nodded and said, "All right. Fellow Taoist is straightforward." Chao Xiang showed a grateful expression. Whether it was true or not, Chao Xiang's attitude was good. Afterwards, he took out a special weighing instrument and recorded the mountain pan saber's weight and length in front of Lu Yi. He also recorded the mountain pan saber's various characteristics with his divine sense before handing it to Lu Yi. "This is the receipt. Fellow Taoist can come to the Chamber of Commerce to pick up the saber in 10 days. Just show this jade slip when the time comes." Lu Yi nodded and carefully put away the jade slip before handing over 1,500 spirit jades to Chao Xiang. It had to be said that the Wuxia Chamber of Commerce's business was quite standard and had won the trust of their customers. Chao Xiang could tell that Lu Yi had other things to trade, so he tentatively asked, "Does fellow Taoist have any other instructions? Does your Chamber of Commerce trade information?" Chao Xiang smiled and nodded. "Naturally." "What kind of information does fellow Taoist want to inquire about?" Lu Yi nodded. "I want to inquire about the location of a galaxy." Chao Xiang said, "If you want to inquire about the galaxy's location, you'll need to pay 1,000 spirit jades." Lu Yi's eyelids twitched. Asking for 1,000 spirit jades at the drop of a hat? Who knew how long the spirit jades he had would last? "Are you sure you can give me an answer?" Lu Yi asked cautiously. It would be too much of a loss if he didn't get a satisfactory answer after paying with his spirit jades. Basically, the Vientiane trading firm knows the locations of all the galaxies in this star field. Of course there are some exceptions. After all, the starry sky is vast, and there are always some remote places that have never interacted with the Vientiane trading firm. If that's the case, then I'll only take 300 spiritual jades as a deposit. Once I've found out more about it, you can pay the rest. It made sense. When Lu Yi said the two words Yu Luo, Chao Xiang even specifically asked how to write the two words Yu Luo. Obviously he was afraid that there would be an accent. Please wait for a moment, fellow Taoist, Chao Xiang said and left. He was probably going to investigate this matter. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Chao Xiang returned with an awkward expression. Fellow Taoist, the situation is like this. I didn't find any records of the Jade Conch Galaxy. If you're not in a hurry, I'll take a look. The Chamber of Commerce can send someone to inquire about it. There should be some clues. There's no hurry. Lu Yi calmly took out 300 spiritual jades and paid the deposit. Tang Jun would sooner or later inquire about the Jade Conch Galaxy through the Vientiane trading firm, but Lu Yi wouldn't save the spiritual jades. He couldn't rely on others for this kind of thing. In the end, Lu Yi still didn't have complete trust in Tang Jun. If this old man found out about the Jade Conch Galaxy's location and ran away alone, Lu Yi wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Therefore he would rather spend 1,000 spiritual jades than pin his hopes on others. As he got up and walked out, he suddenly thought of something. Can you find me a copy of the price of the various fire attribute materials in your Chamber of Commerce? Chao Xiang was startled for a moment before nodding. No problem. A moment later, Lu Yi walked out of the Vientiane trading firm with a jade slip. This time his assets had shrunk by nearly 10%. Moreover, Lu Yi had a hunch that he wouldn't be able to keep the rest of the spiritual jades because the things he was about to buy were the most important. His talent tree's fuel reserves were running low. He hadn't replenished his talent tree's fuel for a long time. Ever since he ascended to the constellation realm, every cultivation consumed the talent tree's fuel, and the consumption rate was much faster than before. This was normal. Before he ascended to the constellation realm, he mostly focused on stealing heaven's secrets and refining spirit pills. However, after ascending to the constellation realm, he needed to refine the energy in the spiritual jades. If it was just refining, it wouldn't consume much of his talent tree's fuel, because the process of absorbing and refining the spiritual jades would remove a lot of impurities. However, he often chose to consume spiritual jades and star beasts monster cores in order to recover faster. This method consumed a lot of his talent tree's fuel. Chapter 1384. Lu Yi almost forgot when he last replenished the talent tree's fuel. Since the talent tree stopped producing new spiritual runes, he no longer cared about it. However, it was foreseeable that as his cultivation increased, the consumption of the talent tree's fuel would increase as well, as the amount of resources he could refine would increase. In order to ensure his future cultivation, it was imperative to replenish the talent tree's fuel. Repairing the mountain pan saber and collecting information about the Jade Conch were things he had to do at the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, but replenishing the talent tree's fuel was not necessary. He did not have a lot of spiritual jades on hand, thus he had to save them as much as he could. After exiting the Chamber of Commerce, he soared into the sky and flew in a certain direction. Half an hour later, he arrived at a spacious area near the edge of the island of Versatility. The area did not have any crisscrossing streets, as if it was a separate space. The trade on the island of Versatility was mainly done by the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, which was bustling with people. Next were the shops on the streets of the island of Versatility. The factions behind the shops were from different realms, and the items sold in the shops were specialties from different realms. However, the people on the island of Versatility had also considered what to do if some cultivators wanted to sell their goods. Some of them were not willing to sell to the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, and wanted to do their own business. Therefore, they had set up a space for those cultivators who did not own a shop to set up their own stalls. The market was open. Lu Yi had accidentally stumbled upon this place when he was strolling around yesterday, thus he was quite familiar with the place. Without further investigation, he went straight to a stall and picked up an irregular crystal the size of a fist. The crystal was fiery red in color like a fire crystal. Lu Yi slightly activated the power of the talent tree, and could clearly feel the surging power contained within it. The quality of this item was much higher than the earth core fire of the 9 continents. Lu Yi had been to the stall yesterday and was quite interested in this item. He had asked the stall owner about its name, and learned that it was called the Dragon Breath Crystal. However, he had only inquired about it and did not show any intention of buying it, mainly because he did not know the price. Now that he was prepared, Lu Yi had an idea of the price of this item. Fellow cultivator, if you like it, feel free to buy it. This item is not expensive, only 800 spiritual jades each. Lu Yi casually asked, how was this thing born? The stall owner said, since it's called the Dragon Breath Crystal, it's naturally related to the Dragon Clan. To tell you the truth, 1,000 years ago, a giant fire dragon came to my domain and occupied a quiet place. When it was sleeping, the dragon breath it breathed out fused with some nearby minerals. After 1,000 years, the Dragon Breath Crystal was slowly born. Lu Yi nodded slightly. This stall owner's story was no different from what was recorded in the jade slip that Chao Xiang gave him. It seemed that he was not lying. The jade slip that Chao Xiang gave him not only recorded the prices of various fire attribute treasures, but also their origins and possible origins. Could be said to be very detailed. However, it was also because of this that Lu Yi realized that when a Dragon Breath Crystal appeared, it wasn't a single piece, but an entire field. In other words, this stall owner definitely had a huge pile of Dragon Breath Crystals. In front of him, Lu Yi took out the jade slip that Chao Xiang gave him. The Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce's Dragon Breath Crystals are only 800. Why are you selling them for 800? Normally, the items sold in the scattered market were cheaper than the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. Only then would there be enough competition. Otherwise, who would come to the scattered market to buy things if everyone's prices were the same? The stall owner looked at Lu Yi, then looked at the jade slip in his hand and chuckled. So you came prepared. In that case, I'll give you 10 spiritual jades cheaper. He didn't blush. This was how business was. There was no need to talk about favors. If the other party didn't know, he would sell it at a higher price. If the other party knew, he would sell it at a lower price. Lu Yi didn't even blink as he mercilessly slashed. 500. The stall owner was dumbfounded. Fellow cultivator, you can't bargain like this. I need a lot. Lu Yi looked at him calmly. The stall owner said, no matter how much you want, I can't sell it for 500. This isn't my personal item. It's a product from the realm I'm in. The spiritual jades sold will be brought back to be divided among many people. I really can't give you this price. If you want to buy it for 500, you'd better go elsewhere. 550. Fellow cultivator, I advise you to be kind. If you act like this, you'll be killed when you leave the Myriad Elephant Sea. 600. If you're selling, I'll take it. If not, I'll leave. The stall owner stretched out his hand, indicating for Lu Yi to do as he pleased. Of course, Lu Yi wouldn't really leave. Bargaining required one to be thick-skinned and ruthless. If he succeeded, he would be happy. If not, he wouldn't lose anything. Give me your lowest price. Lu Yi looked at the stall owner. The reason why he took a fancy to this Dragon Breath Crystal was mainly because the quantity was large enough. If he went to buy other fire-type treasures, he might have to buy many more types. When the time comes, he would have to bargain one by one. He might even lose out. The stall owner grimaced for a while. He could tell that Lu Yi was sincere in buying it. He pondered for a while and said, to be honest, before I came out, the elders of this realm set the lowest price for me at 750. Seeing that you're so sincere, I'll sell it to you for 760. Any lower and I won't accept it. Since the lowest price set for you is 750, why are you increasing my price? The stall owner was speechless. I'm selling things here. You have to let me earn some hard-earned money, right? It's not easy for everyone to go out. Fellow cultivator, you have to understand each other. I've been selling my stall here for a long time. If I have the time, I might as well search for spiritual jades in this realm. Whatever I find is mine. Okay, then. Lu Yi reluctantly agreed. The main reason was that he couldn't cut it down. Moreover, the stall owner was right. He did have to let others earn some money. A Dragon Breath Crystal was 40 spirit jades cheaper than the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't a small sum. After counting the spirit jades he had, Zhou Yuan left a little over 500 for cultivation and handed the rest to the stall owner. In the end, he obtained 24 Dragon Breath Crystals. The majority of the spirit jades he had came from the Alpha Origin Spirit Jade Mine. Although he had consumed some during his exploration of space outside the 9 provinces, he could still find some along the way. Overall, he didn't suffer any losses and even had a small surplus. After giving Nian Yuxian 1,500 spirit jades on Fangsuan Mountain, he was only left with a little over 13,000. But recently he had obtained some spiritual jades from Tang Jun's storage ring. Previously he had also killed 3 robbers and obtained a small amount of spiritual jades. The 3 of them were also poor, so he didn't know how long the energy contained in the 24 Dragon Breath Crystals could last. Lu Yi suddenly realized that his comfortable days weren't over for long. He had to start worrying about cultivation resources again. Back in the 9 provinces, when his cultivation wasn't high, he spent all his time thinking about how to earn merits. Later on he thought about earning battle merits. Now he no longer needed any merits or battle merits. What he needed now was spirit jades, and a large amount of them at that. The stall owner was in a good mood after selling the dragon breath crystals. He said, "Fellow cultivator, if you want more goods in the future, feel free to look for me." He clearly still had a lot of stock on hand. "How long have you been running this stall?" Lu Yi asked offhandedly. The stall owner's face was filled with melancholy. "Almost 3 years. Sigh, let's not talk about it. However, someone will soon come to replace me. My stall won't change. Fellow cultivator, feel free to come here." It wasn't easy to find a suitable stall in a place like this. Hence, many stall owners took turns with their companions from the same region to maintain the principle of not changing stalls. This also made it easier for regular customers to find them. If the 9 provinces could freely travel to and from the myriad elephant galaxy, they would likely use this method to sell their specialties. After all, the 9 provinces didn't have the capital to occupy a shop here. After bidding farewell to the stall owner, Lu Yi felt melancholy. When he came here he still had some money in his pocket. However, he had spent most of it in just a few moments. The island of versatility was bustling with activity, but Lu Yi didn't know where to go. He had to go to the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce to retrieve his mountain pan saber in 10 days. What should he do during this period of time? There were places to stay on the island, but it would obviously cost a lot of spiritual jades. Lu Yi didn't want to spend so much money. It was unrealistic to just wait around. After thinking for a while, he soared into the sky and flew out of the island. There were some things that he wanted to test and verify. A moment later he left the island of versatility. The moment he left, Lu Yi heard a crisp sound coming from the pass hanging on his waist. When he looked down he saw that the pitch-black pass had cracked open from the middle. It was obviously broken. This also meant that he would have to spend another 5 spiritual jades to enter the island of versatility. He searched as he flew. He couldn't go too far from the island of versatility, but it would be inconvenient if he was too close. The closer he was to the island of versatility, the more cultivators there would be. A day later, Lu Yi finally found a suitable location and settled down. A moment later he landed on a reef island with a radius of about 10 feet. It was not safe for him to travel alone. The island of versatility and many other large spiritual islands forbade personal fights, but no one would care on the island of versatility. In other words, if someone found Lu Yi an eyesore and tried to bully him, no one would stand up for him. Lu Yi remembered seeing a spiritual island being besieged on his way here. However, some things couldn't be avoided just because it wasn't safe. How could a cultivator be absolutely safe? To be safe, Lu Yi set up some defensive formations on the reef island. This way he would at least have time to react if he was attacked. He then sat down with his legs crossed and sensed his surroundings. The seawater of the island of versatility was condensed from extremely dense starry sky energy. Although it was condensed and didn't dissipate, it would still affect the surrounding cultivation environment, especially the spiritual islands on the surface of the sea. Under Lu Yi's perception he could tell that the location he was in contained more starry sky energy than normal starry sky. The starry sky energy was like the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to cultivators below the star constellation. Chapter 1385. Cultivators could cultivate anywhere in the starry sky because the starry sky energy was everywhere. However, the efficiency was very low. Just like the cultivators of the 9 prefectures, they could cultivate anywhere in the 9 prefectures. However, there were not many who did so. Even the Spirit Stream realm cultivators knew to head to the Spirit Stream battlefield. The cultivation environment of this reef island was much better than that of ordinary starry skies. Cultivators who did not have high requirements for their cultivation environment could definitely cultivate here. However, the efficiency was naturally not satisfactory. It was better to rely on spirit jades than to take spirit pills, but the advantage was that it was a cost-free transaction. However, no one would do so because it was too unsafe. There were people flying above their heads all the time, who could cultivate in peace, especially when ordinary cultivators had to guard their mines during cultivation. It was easy for them to be ambushed. Of course, if one was on a spiritual island occupied by a powerful force, they would not have to worry about this problem. The ferryman, Fang Wanli, had said that some of the spirit islands had very rich starry sky energy and could completely satisfy the cultivation needs of cultivators in the constellation. If anyone could occupy such a spirit island, they would be able to save a lot of cultivation resources. On the Wanxiang Sea there were many such spiritual islands. This was one of the reasons why the various forces were so keen on fighting for the ownership of spiritual islands. To them, spiritual islands were not only a place to stay, but also a cultivation resource. There was another more important reason. There were spiritual jade mines and spiritual islands. This was something that all the forces in the 4 galaxies coveted. 70% of the spiritual islands occupied by the various forces had spiritual jade mines of various sizes. Only the remaining 30% were considered deserted islands. In the starry sky there were countless small and large domains. However, only the top domains could produce spiritual jade mines. How many top domains were there in the entire star field? Most of them were large domains. These domains did not have spiritual jade mines. However, as long as one was powerful enough, one could snatch one from them. What made people even more envious was that every spirit jade vein here was renewable. In other words, as long as one controlled the mining speed and frequency, they would never be completely depleted. This was because these spirit jade veins originated from the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Unless the 10,000 Elephant Sea disappeared one day, these spirit jade veins would continue to exist. During the mining process, these spirit jade veins would continuously absorb the energy from the sea and condense into new spirit jades. These things were still too far away from Lu Yi. He only came here to confirm 2 things. The first was naturally the speed of cultivation. Now that he had advanced to the middle stage of the constellation realm, the rate of consumption of spiritual jades would definitely be much faster than before. It was just unknown how much he would consume every month. Nearly 3 years ago, when he had just ascended to the constellation realm, he had experimented with it. At that time, he had concluded that he only needed to consume 120 spirit jades per month to satisfy his cultivation needs. Later on, as his strength slowly increased, this consumption also increased, but the increase was very small. Before his breakthrough, Lu Yi estimated that less than 200 spirit jades per month would be enough. What he needed to do now was to figure out the consumption after advancing. He took out 2 spirit jades and held them in his hands. As usual, he activated the power of the talent tree and controlled it to the fastest refining speed that he could accept. This way he could achieve the highest cultivation efficiency and avoid wasting spirit jades at the same time. 3 days later, Lu Yi came to a conclusion. Right now, he needed about 400 pieces of spiritual jade every month. The energy consumption had doubled. Furthermore, this was only the state of having just advanced. In the future, as his strength increased and the depth of his bone marrow's refinement increased, it would definitely increase. Bitterness in secret, he only had about 500 spiritual jades with him. Didn't that mean it was only enough for him to cultivate for a month? What was he going to do? After calming himself down, he took out the 24 pieces of dragon breath crystals that he had spent a lot of money to buy previously and activated the talent tree's power to absorb them, replenishing the talent tree's fuel reserves. Feeling the increase in the talent tree's fuel reserves, he finally felt better. In the end, the dragon breath crystals that were worth 760 pieces of spiritual jades were indeed worth every penny. The fire-type energy stored inside was so dense that the earth core fire was not even fit to carry his shoes. There was at least a difference of 100 times. In this way, he did not need to worry about the talent tree's fuel for a short period of time. He sat cross-legged on the reef island for a long time. Originally, he wanted to wait for the surroundings to be empty. When the time came, he wanted to verify the second matter. In the end, he waited for a long time and did not find a suitable opportunity. There were always people flying around above his head. He decided not to wait any longer. He got up and walked to the reef island, staring at the deep sea in front of him. At the same time, in midair not far away, 2 figures flew past side by side. One was a white-haired old man, and the other was a young and beautiful girl. The girl's cultivation was only at the early stage of the constellation realm, and her spiritual energy waves seemed to be unstable. It was obvious that she had just advanced to the constellation realm not long ago. It was her first time here, so everything was new to her. The old man brought her along as they flew forward, occasionally saying something to her. The girl's little head kept nodding. Suddenly she saw Lu Yi and pointed. "Master, look, someone wants to jump into the sea. I'm afraid there's something wrong with him." The old man raised his hand and slapped her arm down. He scolded, "Don't point and don't talk nonsense. The 10,000 Elephant Sea is formed by extremely dense starry sky energy. Although we constellation realms have started to absorb the starry sky energy for our own use to strengthen ourselves, there's no point in going too far. This seawater is highly toxic even to Rizhao. No one is willing to go deep into it. This is common knowledge in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Unless they're crazy, who would jump into the sea? You must remember this in the future. Plop. A soft sound came from below. The young girl said, "He's crazy." The old man's eyelids twitched and he quickly stopped. He really couldn't understand how there could be such a stupid person in this world. "Master, do you want to save him?" The young girl had a worried look on her face. The old man hesitated and shook his head. "No need. This person is probably new to the 10,000 Elephant Sea and wants to test the mysteries of the seawater. Let's not meddle and just watch." They waited quietly, but they still didn't see the figure of the person who jumped into the sea. After a few minutes, the old man sighed. "Let's go." The young girl said, "Aren't we waiting?" "No need. If he doesn't come up after such a long time, even an immortal can't save him. Even an immortal can't save him. He's definitely dead down there. If that person came up on his own earlier, he might still be alive. In the worst-case scenario, his foundation would be damaged and his cultivation would drop. However, if he stayed down for a long time, he would definitely die. Even Rizhao might not be able to last that long, let alone a young descendant who was only a constellation realm cultivator." The young girl followed behind the old man. She looked back with a face full of regret. She couldn't understand why he was still so stubborn when he was already a constellation realm cultivator. Under the 30,000 Elephant Sea, Lu Ye's figure kept sinking. As he observed, he saw large patches of dense gray fog burning in his talent tree. The fuel reserves that he had just replenished were being consumed rapidly. This undoubtedly meant that too many impurities or things that were harmful to him had entered his body. Most importantly, he didn't actively absorb the energy of the surrounding seawater. He didn't take the initiative, but the terrifying energy contained in the surrounding seawater was like leeches that smelled blood. They frantically drilled into his body. He finally understood why no one dared to easily enter the 10,000 Elephant Sea. In this place, regardless of whether you were willing or not, the energy in the seawater would enter your body. Moreover, it was much more efficient than any cultivation method. It was very easy to fill a cultivator's body with energy and then expand. In the end, it was inevitable that the cultivator would explode and die. Along with the seawater energy entering his body, there was also a large amount of impurities. These impurities were harmful to cultivators. Perhaps there was a chance to eliminate them later, but it would inevitably cost a great price. If it couldn't be eliminated, it would damage the cultivator's foundation. Activating spiritual power to protect the body couldn't completely isolate the impurities. Even with the help of treasures, it was difficult to offset them. Therefore, even if someone entered the 10,000 Elephant Sea, they couldn't stay for too long. He had the talent tree with him, so he didn't have to worry about his safety. However, the key was that this would consume too much of the talent tree's fuel. This situation was a bit like when he had entered the blood river to cultivate in the blood refinement realm. However, in comparison, the 10,000 Elephant Sea was undoubtedly many times more dangerous. When he didn't have to worry about the fuel for the talent tree in the future, perhaps he could come here to cultivate because the efficiency of cultivating here was too high. However, he couldn't do that now. If he really used up all of the talent tree's fuel here, it would affect his future cultivation. He didn't continue to sink. Although he would rush out from the bottom of the 10,000 Elephant Sea, if he continued to sink like this, it would take a very long time. The fuel reserves he had now wouldn't be able to support him until then. Looking up, there was only a faint light above his head. Below his feet was a deep darkness. Just as Lu Yi was about to float up, he suddenly felt something quickly pass by him. He was startled and raised his hand to touch his waist. He touched nothing and then remembered that the Pan Mountain Saber was still in the 10,000 Elephant Chamber of Commerce. He released his divine sense and could only move 3 inches away from his body. The suppression of divine sense in the sea was too strong. Without a saber in his hand and with his divine sense restrained, Lu Yi didn't know what had just swam by him. Without hesitation, he activated his spiritual power and rushed up while being vigilant of his surroundings. Just as he moved, Lu Yi felt that the current beside him was a bit abnormal. At the same time, with the help of the faint light, he saw something small quickly pass by. Without the slightest hesitation, he threw a punch in that direction. Lu Yi felt as if something had been smashed into smithereens. He scooped it up and continued upwards. A moment later, he returned to the reef island from before. He stared at the thing he brought back from the sea and was dumbfounded for a moment. This 10,000 Elephant Sea, actually had fish. Chapter 1386. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was extremely dangerous. Even cultivators couldn't stay in the sea for a long time. He thought that the sea would be lifeless, but he didn't expect that there would be a living creature in there. The thing brought back from the sea was about a foot long, snow-white, flat, and half a finger wide. There was a translucent wing-like thing under its head, but its head was missing. It should have been blown off by Lu Ye's punch just now. However, judging from the remaining half of its body, it was clearly a fish. There was actually a fish in this dangerous 10,000 Elephant Sea. Lu Ye clicked his tongue in wonder. However, anything that could survive in the 10,000 Elephant Sea was definitely not an ordinary fish. Lu Ye seriously suspected that the thing in his hand was a type of star beast. Only certain star beasts could survive in this harsh environment. While he was sizing up the fish, he suddenly heard a rough voice. "Little fellow Taoist, you're really lucky." Lu Ye followed the voice and saw a figure rushing over from the side. The spiritual energy fluctuations on that person's body showed that it was Yu Yao. In the blink of an eye, the person who spoke stopped in front of Lu Ye and revealed himself. It was a middle-aged man with a full beard. He was tall and sturdy, and his face was bold and unrestrained. His large eyes were fixed on the dead fish in Lu Ye's hand, as if he was very interested in it. Lu Ye couldn't help but be vigilant. Ling Yu saw that I seemed to be really kind to her, so she humbly asked, "Is he called Lu Ye?" Chiu Pingyang left. According to me, once the Lu leaf salmon left the sea, they should be dealt with slowly. Otherwise, whether it was cooking or refining, its effect would be reduced. After watching Chiu Pingyang's figure disappear, Ling Yu took out a star map and checked it. Sure enough, she found a place called Fishing Island on the map. The tall and sturdy woman laughed. "Fellow Taoist is a straightforward person. You also lied to me, saying that you were going to invite a guest today and were missing a main dish, so you wanted to go to the fishing island to see if you could catch a Lu leaf. Who knew that these anglers would be so lucky that they didn't catch a single Lu leaf, so they returned in disappointment. On the way there you saw that he didn't have a single Lu leaf. That was your luck and also his luck. You often buy Lu leaves, so if he sold that Lu leaf, it would be worth at most 2,700 jade." Since Ling Yu had Fa Zhen to explain, he made up a story without thinking. "You were looking at the sea and it ran out to look at you. You were shocked and gave it a punch. That was extremely unlikely to happen. It was certain that the value of the Yangfei salmon was small, but a landleaf salmon was worth several thousand to tens of thousands of Bai Ling. Who would be tempted? Of course, the risk was also small. Originally, I was still thinking about where I should go to make money, but catching a woodleaf salmon on purpose gave me a direction. What kind of words were those? Yang Fei didn't understand. At that location, even an angel wouldn't be able to see the fishermen standing under the islands and reefs, fishing quietly with fishing equipment in their hands. Ling Yu understood. "Thank you, fellow Taoist." What words? In my eyes, the smallest problem wasn't the lack of Bai Ling cultivation required by Ling. Although the fuel reserves of the talent tree were abundant in a short period of time, there was no way to replenish it. Naturally, the less stock there was, the worse it would be. Otherwise, when I needed it in the past, I couldn't find a way to replenish it. The tall and sturdy man seemed to have noticed this as well, and he smiled faintly. "There's no need to be nervous, little fellow cultivator. Although there are no laws on the myriad phenomenon sea, there are still tacit rules. Under normal circumstances, those with lower cultivation levels will attack those with higher cultivation levels." I sighed in my heart. In the small Wanxiang Sea there were so many cultivators. No one worked hard for Bai Ling and risked their lives for it. No one could blink and spend several thousand Bai Ling to buy a fish to cook. Catching the woodleaf salmon just now was due to luck, but I might not have such bad luck every time. Moreover, even if I didn't have that kind of luck, if I took out the woodleaf salmon, it would be difficult to explain to others. If I was targeted by unscrupulous people, it was very unlikely that I would expose the secret of not being able to stay in the Wanxiang Sea for long periods of time. The tall and sturdy woman looked at my vivid gestures and couldn't help but be stunned. She sighed with emotion. In the Wanxiang Sea there were so many young people. No one could catch a woodleaf like that. Fellow Taoist, your luck is really amazing. It was precisely because of the delay in buying a woodleaf that the tall and sturdy woman was willing to pay Yang Fei 100 jade less. It couldn't be said that every cultivator who came here for the first time dreamed of getting rich overnight. That woodleaf was caught by him? After flying for more than half a day, we quickly approached the fishing island. If it were him, Chiu Pingyang would also have told Ling Yu that fishing would lead to poverty for 8 generations and that playing with fish would ruin one's life. Fellow Taoist, he mentioned the fishing island just now. What is this place? Ling Yu asked curiously. There are angels. Yang Fei's words were true. Right, Swa had something to do, so she jumped up and flew over to take a look at the situation. Right now, I only had a vague idea in my mind. I didn't have a clue as to how to implement it. No matter what, I would go to the fishing island first to take a look. It was true that wine and meat stink behind the door of the rich, but the road was not frozen to death. 28,000 jade was indeed a high price. The main thing was that the fish was picked up for free. Yang Fei was very happy. Just now she was worried about Bai Ling. Now that she thought about it, she had picked up a fortune for free. Therefore she didn't care too much about it. Bai Ling was forbidden under my control. As for fishing, whether it was good or bad, it could not satisfy the complex and simple desires of those cultivators. This was because compared to other methods of getting rich, fishing could be considered a method that required a high entry level, but the benefits were extremely small. As cultivators, the smaller the risk and the smaller the reward, the more interested they would be. This was especially true for those who were young and inexperienced. They always felt that they were favored by the heavens and that there was nothing that could stump them and that they would definitely succeed. In the end, they were often beaten by reality and had to resign themselves to their fate in dejection. Because the price of woodleaf salmon kept going up and down, fewer and fewer people were tempted to join the fishing community. Even if he looked at our posture of not moving at all, he didn't seem to have gained anything. It's very valuable. The tall and sturdy woman nodded seriously. Depending on the quality and size of a woodleaf, the price can range from several thousand to several tens of thousands of Yang Fei. Yang Fei remembered my name and the direction of the small island I was pointing at. The tall and sturdy woman looked at me deeply. Fishing leads to poverty for 8 generations and playing with fish will ruin one's life. There aren't many people who are lucky enough to retire from that field. In the end, they are the first to lose both their life and their wealth. The tall and sturdy woman said, outside this island is a place where fishermen gather. Because woodleaf salmon are extremely rare and precious, a group of people who specialize in fishing for woodleaf salmon have been born in the Wanxiang Sea. This fishing island is where these fishermen gather. The tall and sturdy woman had probably seen very few people like Ling Yu. She knew that there were some things that had to be experienced in order to understand. Persuasion from others was useless. She chuckled and said, that's right. If he didn't get anything last time, the angel will go to the small island to find you. You will buy a small amount of Yang Fei salmon for a long time. When he reaches the small island, he will say that he is looking for Chiu Pingyang. You will give him the worst price. Ling Yu was startled. I knew that the woodleaf was very valuable, but I didn't expect it to be that valuable. One had to know that a spirit treasure was only worth several thousand white spirits. Did that mean that a single Yang Fei salmon was equivalent to a spirit treasure? However, since ancient times, that kind of number was the number of fishermen. Generation after generation passed on. If no one came in and out, no one would join. Therefore, ever since the Wanxiang Sea existed, the fishermen had never disappeared. Especially in recent years, there were no signs of them growing smaller. 2,800 white jades. The tall and sturdy woman directly quoted a price. Obviously she didn't consider it. I'll sell it. Ling Yu said straightforwardly. She said that the fish could be cooked and used in pills. Cooking it didn't have any negative effects on cultivators. At the same time, it was the main ingredient of several small pills. The price should be very low. Ling Yu said, Taoist brother didn't explain much to you. Since he can see that you are a newcomer, if he really wanted to deceive you, the angel could have just quoted several hundred white spirits. Why did he have to quote such a low price? After calming himself down, he asked, what about the fish in your hand? The tall and sturdy woman nodded. It's a woodleaf salmon. It's a star beast that only exists in the Wanxiang Sea. It's naturally fragrant, and its meat is delicate. It can be cooked and used in pills. If it's cooked, it can purify spiritual power and strengthen one's physique. If it's used in pills, it can slightly increase the medicinal efficacy of spirit pills. The main ingredient of several small pills is a part of the woodleaf. The tall and sturdy woman flew over and paid Ling Yu for 2,800 white jades. Then the deal was done. Yang Fei nodded. How did you catch it with your bare hands? The tall and sturdy woman asked with a mischievous expression. At the same time, she vaguely realized something. If that thing were to be sold, wouldn't it be very valuable? As if she had seen through Ling Yu's intention, the tall and sturdy woman mischievously advised, Taoist friend, if you think it's boring, you can go and observe the 17 islands. This is a deserted island occupied by someone, and it's forbidden for people to come and go. However, you still have to advise him that Zhongyi wants to participate. There's a saying among these anglers that doesn't make sense. The Wanxiang Sea was a place full of opportunities and opportunities. Outside it, weak cultivators from 7 different galaxies gathered. Every day, small quantities of goods were transported over, and small quantities of goods were digested. The daily consumption of white spirits outside was bound to be a small number. Some people were so poor that they could not even guarantee cultivation resources, but some people were so rich that they could not treat a wood leaf that cost several thousand white spirits as a dish. The further one went, the fewer anglers there were. The tall and sturdy woman said, if the fish in his hand was broken, he could sell it for 7,000 white spirits. Unfortunately, the fish head has been lost, so the price will be reduced. You should know that the fish eye and fish brain are 2 extremely precious medicinal materials. She changed the topic. Taoist friend, are you willing to part with that wood leaf? The tall and sturdy woman was slightly stunned. She smiled and said, Taoist friend, you seem to be new here. Are you afraid that you'll misquote him? In a place like the Wanxiang Sea, any kind of carelessness would be excessive. Taoist friend, how much can you offer? Ling Yu asked. Ling Yu really knows how useless that thing is. Just now, I thought it was an angel star beast and almost threw it away. End of chapter. Chapter 1387. Fishing Island was not small. At least, it was bigger than most of the spiritual islands Lu Yi had seen. However, it was actually a deserted island that was not occupied by any forces. The main reason was that there was no spiritual jade mine on the island, so there was no value in occupying it. In the 10,000 Elephant Sea, there were many deserted islands like Fishing Island. Some of them had become the strongholds of certain forces or groups. Outsiders were not allowed to enter as it would be considered a provocation. However, the anglers had always been very loose since ancient times, so they did not prohibit people from entering and leaving. When Lu Yi arrived, he saw that there were many people gathered here. Those who stood quietly at the edge of the island with fishing gear in their hands, their eyes fixed on a certain spot on the sea. They were undoubtedly fishermen who were fishing. There were also some people who were not fishing but walking around to observe. Lu Yi guessed that these people were like him, interested in this matter, and came to observe. The anglers were standing at a distance of at least 1,000 feet from each other. The cultivators who were watching nearby also did not get close to them. They were also watching from a distance of 1,000 feet away. It could be seen that the people here, regardless of whether they were anglers or spectators, were silently abiding by an unspoken rule. Lu Yi looked around and randomly chose an angler. He hovered 1,000 feet away from him, making sure that the other party could see him from the corner of his eyes. It was not good to stand behind him. That would easily arouse the other party's hostility. If he was in their shoes, Lu Yi would not be happy if someone was staring at him from behind. Although he did not understand the rules here, he at least understood the way of life. The angler was a young man. He was handsome and tall. He was really good looking. He stood on the shore, holding fishing equipment in one hand and a small wine gourd in the other. He took a sip from it from time to time, looking very leisurely. Lu Yi had his own reasons for choosing this angler to observe. Although he was young, he had interacted with quite a number of people. He could basically tell if a stranger was easy to get along with or not with just a glance. This young man's face was very peaceful. He seemed to be an easy person to get along with. At the very least, he could ensure that he would not be chased away when he observed. Another point was that the way this person was holding the gourd reminded Lu Yi of fourth brother Li Baxian. Fourth brother Li Baxian was also graceful and graceful. Lu Yi felt a natural sense of intimacy towards such a person. Sure enough, when the other party noticed that he was watching from the side, he only turned his head to glance at him and nodded slightly in greeting. He didn't have any intention of driving him away. He fished quietly while Lu Yi watched quietly. Time passed. Lu Yi discovered a problem, which was that whitey was very difficult to catch. On the entire fishing island, there were at least hundreds of people fishing like the young man. However, after watching here for more than half a day, no one caught anything. No wonder Qiu Pingyang said that he didn't manage to buy any fish on this island. Judging from the situation, it would be very difficult to catch a whitey. This was probably one of the reasons why Bai Ling was so expensive. This thing lived within the Myriad Sea, and ordinary cultivators utterly didn't dare to enter deep into the sea to capture it. They could only rely on this method of fishing, but the chances of obtaining it were extremely small as well. This caused the phenomenon of the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. After another half a day, the entire fishing island still had no harvest. 1,000 feet away from Lu Yi, the young man suddenly poured out the wine gourd in his hand, then turned to look at Lu Yi. "Do you have any wine?" Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded, "Yes." Saying so, he flashed to the young man's side and took out some wine jars from his storage ring. He usually didn't drink unless he had a small gathering with friends, so under normal circumstances he wouldn't buy wine for himself. The wine in the storage ring was the spoils of war he obtained after killing people. They came from all kinds of sources and were of different quality. Lu Yi took out a dozen jars in succession, and the young man hurriedly said, that's enough. You're too kind. How much are these?" Lu Yi waved his hand, "You can have them." It was nothing more than some wine which wasn't worth much. The young man smiled and didn't refuse. "Then thank you for your kindness, fellow Taoist." Saying so, he stuffed the fishing gear into Lu Ye's hands. "Help me look after them for a while." Lu Yi instinctively took the fishing rod, stood there blankly, and then watched the young man pour the jars of wine into his wine gourd. "Fellow Taoist, you've been watching here for a long time. Have you seen anything?" the young man asked as he worked. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't seem to be fishing seriously." The reason why he said so was mainly because this young man was different from the other anglers. In Lu Ye's observation, the other anglers all looked as if they were facing a great enemy. Their expressions were tense, as if they could be caught at any time. They didn't even look away. But this young man's fishing posture was much more languid. He drank a little wine, looking here and there. Especially when a female cultivator passed by nearby, he would definitely be attracted. The other anglers were quiet, but he didn't care at all. At this moment he was chatting happily with Lu Yi, not afraid of scaring away the fish. Hearing Lu Ye's words, the young man couldn't help but laugh. He shook his head and said leisurely, "If there's fish, fish. If there's no fish, entertainment. Freedom, without the worries of the past, without the worries of the present. Only then can one attain the great Tao of fishing." The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. It was just fishing, what was there to talk about? However, he felt more and more that this person's temperament was carefree. Changing the topic, the young man said, "Fellow Taoist, it seems that you're interested in fishing? Since I've drunk your wine, if you have any questions, feel free to ask." He was undoubtedly knowledgeable about the ways of the world. Since he had taken Lu Ye's wine for free, he was willing to share some of it. Lu Yi naturally wouldn't be polite and asked him about fishing. Only then did he learn that fishing here was not as simple as he thought. First of all, the fishing equipment was very particular. It was specially refined for use here. It wasn't as if one could just casually get a fishing rod and come here to fish. In particular, the fishing line was refined with extremely pure magnetic ore. Only then could it be soaked in the sea for a long time. Otherwise, if it were an ordinary spiritual item, it would probably be eroded after entering the sea and wouldn't be able to last long. However, the biggest problem with the fishing line refined with magnetic ore was that it wasn't tough enough, so it was easy to break. This led to the fact that one couldn't raise the fishing rod too hard when catching fish. If it was too hard, the fishing line would break and the fish would run away. There was also a technique to catching fish. One had to let the fish slip out of the water slowly. Only then could one use an object to catch the fish. The bait was also specially made. It was a kind of spiritual pill specially used for fishing. It wasn't something that could be done by hanging an earthworm on it like in the mortal world. In addition, when fishing, one had to pay full attention and use the fishing rod in one's hand to sense the movement of the fishing line. This was because the white spirit only needed an instant to eat the bait, so it was meaningless to raise the rod too early. If it was too late, the bait would be gone and the fish would run away. This was also the reason why Lu Yi saw that the anglers all looked as if they were facing a great enemy. They were all focused on sensing the movement of the fishing line. It could be said that fishing here was an extremely difficult thing. One couldn't be distracted at all. It was no worse than being in a cultivation state. As the young man spoke, Lu Yi sensed the fishing line and found that it was indeed as he said. His spiritual sense could be extended through the fishing rod, so he could clearly sense the slightest movement of the fishing line. The young man's explanation was very detailed, and Lu Yi felt very comfortable. He was lucky to have met such a person who was willing to tell him these things. Otherwise, he would have wasted a lot of time exploring by himself. When the young man took the fishing rod from Lu Ye's hand, he kindly advised, "Although fishing is interesting and you may get rich overnight, fellow Taoist still needs to be careful. This is a field that can't be entered easily." Lu Yi nodded. "I understand. Fishing can ruin 3 generations, but playing with fish can ruin one's life." The young man laughed. So fellow Taoist has heard of this saying. Then it's easy. This is not an alarmist talk, but something that happens every year. Some people want to get rich overnight, but in the end, not only do they delay their cultivation, but they also lose all their investment. If you still want to join under the premise that you are fully mentally prepared, you can tell me. Maybe I can help you a little. What do you mean? Lu Yi was puzzled. The young man said, some people have already left this field, but they still have fishing equipment. I can help you buy it at a cheap price and save you the trouble of buying new ones. Lu Yi's eyes lit up. Then I will have to trouble fellow Taoist. The young man said, do you really want to buy it? Of course. Lu Yi nodded seriously. I will contact them. You can also inquire about the specific price. I don't dare to say too much, but I can still help you get 70% of the price. As he said this, he took out a sound talisman to send a message. Obviously, he was going to contact the person who sold the fishing equipment. Of course, Lu Yi would not completely believe him. He did not avoid anything and began to contact Fang Wanli in front of him to inquire about the market price. After a while, he had a plan in mind. Fang Wanli was also advising him not to join the fishing industry so easily. Of course, he had good intentions. After a while, the young man said, a set of fishing equipment including a fishing rod, 3 sets of fishing lines, a net and 3,000 spirit jades. Can you accept? Lu Yi did a little calculation. This price was really not expensive. According to the market price he heard from Fang Wanli, such a set of fishing equipment would cost about 4,000 spirit jades. He immediately nodded. Yes. The young man said, then I will ask someone to send it over. The person is nearby. He sent another message. Fellow Taoist, how should I address you? Lu Yi asked. Since this person had helped him so much and was so enthusiastic, Lu Yi naturally had to inquire about his name. No matter what, they might become colleagues in the future and fight side by side in this place. The young man smiled leisurely. In the mortal world, those who carry sabers and swords are sabers and swordsmen. He raised the fishing rod in his hand. On Fishing Island, those who hold the rod are fishermen. Then, he patted the ladle hanging on the other side of his waist. What's my name? Lu Yi looked at the ladle and then at him. He hesitated and said, ladle? Fisherman? Chapter 1388. Of course, the young man's name wasn't Xiao Ku, but Pu Ku. Lu Yi didn't know what this person's parents were thinking to give him such a name. Or maybe he thought it was interesting and changed his name later. He didn't need to verify it. After reporting his name, he and Pu Ku finally got to know each other. Of course, he still used the pseudonym Li Taibai. The people in the Wanxiang galaxy were complicated and came from all kinds of backgrounds. He didn't dare to use the name Lu Yi from the Nine Heavens realm. If someone asked about his background, he would definitely say Wushuang continent. In Tang Jun's mind, he was Wushuang Li Taibai. After waiting for a while, a stream of light flew in from the side and landed not far away, revealing a petite figure. It was a woman with wheat-colored skin and a good figure. However, he couldn't see her face clearly because she was wearing a veil. The veil was obviously an extraordinary spiritual treasure that could block divine sense. She didn't wear much, so her calves, stomach and even half of her arms were exposed. What caught Lu Ye's attention was the strange and complicated patterns on the woman's exposed skin. Ghost Clan. Lu Yi recognized the woman's origin at a glance. The strange and complicated patterns weren't acquired, but the manifestation of the Ghost Clan's bloodline. You want to buy? The Ghost Clan woman looked at Lu Yi and asked. Lu Yi immediately understood that this was the person Pu Ku had contacted to sell fishing gear. He didn't expect it to be a ghost and a woman at that. Although there were quite a few people fishing here, it was rare to see a woman. Among the hundreds of people, there were less than 20 of them. What was rare was that Pu Ku's gaze was actually focused on this woman. One had to know that all the female cultivators who passed by were followed by his gaze, especially those with good figures. He was especially focused on them. That's me. Lu Yi nodded. Have you agreed on the price? I won't lower the price. The Ghost Clan woman looked at Pu Ku again. Pu Ku smiled. Don't worry, I'll do as you say. 3,000 spiritual jades. The Ghost Clan woman took a deep breath and stretched out her hand to Lu Yi. Pay up. Lu Yi didn't spoil her and said indifferently, look at the goods first. The ghost woman tilted her head and took out a storage ring, tossing it to Lu Yi. Everything is inside, check it yourself. Lu Yi inspected the goods for a moment and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with them. Only then did he hand over the storage ring that he had prepared in advance. After the Ghost Clan woman finished her investigation, she let out a long sigh of relief and cursed, Damn it, I finally sold it. This thing is really my heart disease. As she spoke, she glared hatefully at Pu Ku. This old lady must have had a hole in her head at that time. I was deceived by your flowery words. Parker was speechless. I advise you not to be impulsive. You were the one who saw the quick money and insisted on joining. Now you're blaming me. It's unreasonable. Anyway, it's all your fault. If you didn't catch Bai Ling back then, I wouldn't have stepped into the pit. As he spoke, he looked over at Lu Yi and his eyes curved into crescents. Patting Lu Yi on the shoulder, he said, "From now on, you're a friend of mine. If you want to kill someone, send me a message and I'll give you a 20% discount." A friend of mine just like that? However, Lu Yi was concerned about something else. What's your name, fellow Taoist? Ghost? What? Have you heard of my name? No. This is the first time I've heard of it. It's a novelty. Lu Yi had never heard of Ghost, but he knew Yu Ping. They were both ghosts and they were both women. Lu Yi guessed that these two were related. Although the universe was vast, it wasn't very big. Do you have any musical notes? Come here. Ghost was very friendly and extended her small hand to Lu Yi. Lu Yi didn't want to give it to her, but he couldn't refuse, so he could only take out his own musical note. Ghost took it, nimbly imprinted her own mark on it and tossed it back to Lu Yi. Remember, 20% off. As she said that, she turned and left in a carefree manner. After Ghost left, Lu Yi began to take out his fishing equipment. Then, under Pu Ku's guidance, he tied a set of fishing lines to the fishing rod and fastened the hook. Pu Ku also gave him 2 spirit pills as bait. Lu Yi thanked him and took them. After hanging the bait on the hook, he was ready to fish. Looking around to find a suitable place, Pu Ku said, "If you don't mind, let's do it here. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me at any time." Lu Yi thanked him and cast the bait about 10 feet away from him. Although it was his first time and the process was a little rough, he had observed for a long time before, so the process was not wrong. He also knew that he should focus on sensing the movement of the fishing line at this moment. Although no one on Fishing Island had any harvest this day, in fact, the frequency of fish eating the bait was still very high. From time to time, someone would lift the rod and retract the line. Some people even tried to fish, but for some reason they always failed. Lu Ye's bait had only been in the water for less than half an hour when he felt movement on the fishing line. Learning from the others, he raised the rod slightly and felt the line tighten. When the bait came out of the water, he saw that the spirit pill hanging on the hook was missing a corner. Obviously, it had been bitten by a fish. You have to rehook it. Although ghost spirits have no intelligence, they are still very sensitive to danger. If the hook is exposed, they will never eat the bait. Pu Ku carefully instructed from the side. Lu Yi did the same and cast the bait again. After a few hours, Lu Yi retracted the rod for the last time. Looking at the empty hook with a helpless expression, he looked at it helplessly. When he first saw it, he realized that fishing here was extremely difficult, but when he really started, he found that the difficulty was not ordinary. In the past few hours, he also had the experience of catching fish twice. However, the first time, his action of retracting the rod was a little too big. As a result, the fishing line broke and the fish escaped. The second time he learned his lesson. The fishing line did not break, but in the process of fighting a battle of wits and courage with ghost spirits, it still escaped the hook. After a few hours he had used up 2 bait pills, a set of fishing line and a hook. It was a heavy loss. Don't worry, try more and you will succeed. Pu Ku comforted him from the side. Seeing Lu Yi put away all the fishing equipment into his storage ring, he asked in surprise, "You're giving up already?" Lu Yi shook his head. "There's no more bait. Go back and buy some." "Where should I buy some?" He couldn't keep using other people's bait. Although Lu Yi didn't know how many spirit jades a special bait pill cost, it couldn't be cheap. Pu Ku had already given him 2 pills, so he couldn't keep using other people's bait. They were neither relatives nor friends, and Pu Ku had already helped him a lot. Calculating the time, Lu Yi should go to the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce to retrieve his mountain pan saber. The Vientiane Chamber of Commerce sells it. Lu Yi nodded, said goodbye to Pu Ku and rushed out of the fishing island. 2 days later, Lu Yi returned to the Vientiane Island and went to the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce with ease. He had already sent a message to Chao Xiang before he came. When Lu Yi arrived, he went straight to the private room from before. Chao Xiang was already waiting. When he saw Lu Yi, he bowed first and pointed to the things on the table. "Fellow Taoist Li, the saber is here. Please inspect it." Lu Yi took the mountain pan saber out of its sheath and poured spiritual energy into it. After a while, he nodded slightly, yes. The cracks on the saber had disappeared, and there were no hidden injuries on the blade. The craftsmanship of the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce's refiners was quite good. If there are no mistakes, please return the jade slip you took last time. Lu Yi had forgotten about this. He quickly took out the jade slip and handed it over. Chao Xiang checked it and confirmed that there were no mistakes. He pointed to the jade box on the table and said, "These are the bait pills you need. There are 20 pills in a box." "What's the price?" Lu Yi asked. "One bait pill is worth 100 spirit jades." Even though Lu Yi was mentally prepared, he couldn't help but be surprised. No wonder there was such a rumor in the fishing circle. Fishing required a lot more spirit jades than he thought. Based on the hours he spent fishing just now, he had already used up 200 jades. If a person fished for a day, he would use up one bait pill every 6 hours. That meant he would need 4 bait pills, which was worth 400 spirit jades. This didn't include the loss of fishing lines and hooks. It was only a day's worth of spirit jades. If there was a harvest during the day, he could still make a lot of money. However, if there was no harvest for a long time, no one would be able to endure it. That ghost looked like it had gone bankrupt from fishing. It was probably because it had bought a lot of fishing lines and bait pills. 20 bait pills were equivalent to 2,000 spirit jades, which was equivalent to the price of a spirit treasure. He had accidentally caught a white spirit before and sold it for 2,600 spirit jades. If he threw in 20 bait pills, he might not be able to catch one if he was unlucky. If he added the cost of fishing gear, it would be 5,000 spirit jades. Lu Yi only had a little more than 100 spirit jades left. Naturally, he couldn't afford it. He had no choice but to take out a spirit treasure that he didn't use. He had about 5 or 6 spirit treasures that he didn't use. He had originally planned to let the sword gourd devour them when he needed them. Now he could only use them for emergencies. After a moment of hesitation, Lu Yi took out all the spirit treasures that he didn't use and placed them on the table. "Give me an estimate. There would be chances to get more spoils in the future. It wouldn't be too late to let the sword gourd devour them then." Right now he really needed more spirit jades. As the manager of the Chamber of Commerce, Chao Xiang was naturally experienced in dealing with customers. He could easily estimate the price of a few spirit treasures. 6 spirit treasures, some good and some bad, totaled up to about 13,000 spirit jades. This price was undoubtedly much lower than what Lu Yi had expected. Chao Xiang saw his doubts and explained with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Li, the value of a spirit treasure depends on whether or not there is a need for it. The Chamber of Commerce has to bear the risk of not being able to sell the spirit treasures. Perhaps it will be a loss. Therefore, the Chamber of Commerce has a requirement for the price of spirit treasures. Generally, we will only buy at a 40% discount. If fellow Taoist Li feels that it is not suitable, you can take it to a shop outside or a market. The price may be higher, but it won't be too much." Chapter 1389. Chao Xiang was telling the truth, but it was not entirely true. At least, Lu Yi knew that if the spirit treasures recovered by the Chamber of Commerce could not be sold, they would definitely be melted to extract useful materials, so it was impossible to lose money. At most, it was a situation of neither loss nor profit. After bargaining with Chao Xiang for a while, he finally got an extra 500 jades. After paying the 2,000 jades for the bait pills, Lu Yi went straight to the stall selling the dragon breath crystals. It was still the stall owner. Seeing that Lu Yi came back to buy the dragon breath crystals so soon, he was naturally happy. According to the previous price, Lu Yi bought 15 dragon breath crystals. After leaving the stall, Lu Yi only had 200 jades left. But since he had bought what he needed, it was time to show off his skills. However, Lu Yi had to think carefully about how to do it without giving himself away. While urging the power of the talent tree to devour the dragon breath crystals, he flew in the direction of the fishing island. There was a reason why the fishermen were concentrated on the fishing island and its surrounding areas. White spirits were the most abundant on the fishing island and its surrounding areas. They were less distributed in other areas. In the past, there were anglers who did not believe it and went to other places to try, but the result was that not only did they not gain anything, but even the fish did not take the bait. Over time, any angler with a little bit of experience would not go to other places to do useless work, which led to the situation where the anglers gathered around the fishing island. Puku was the one who told Lu Yi about this. Otherwise, Lu Yi wouldn't have known about it. Fortunately, Puku mentioned it. Otherwise, Lu Yi would have gone fishing in a deserted place. In his plan, it was best not to let anyone see what he was about to do. Now he had no choice but to go to the fishing island. After rushing all the way nearly 2 days later, he returned to the fishing island. Lu Yi was not going to stay with Puku anymore. In his previous observation, all the anglers here silently followed the hidden rule of staying 1,000 feet away from others. He had no fishing experience before, and Puku kindly guided him, so he deliberately let him stay 100 feet away from him. Now that he had some experience, it was not appropriate to squeeze with others. When he was looking around trying to find a suitable place, Puku's voice sounded in his ears, "Brother Tai-bai, go over there." He turned his head and looked in Puku's direction, only to see him pointing in a direction. 4 hours ago, someone left due to some matters. There should be a seat over there, Puku explained. Lu Yi thanked him and flew in that direction. After a while, he found a suitable spot. He happily went forward, steadied himself, took out his fishing gear, hung the bait, and threw the rod into the water. After a while, he sensed movement on the fishing line. Lu Yi tried to raise the rod, but as soon as there was movement, the baited fish were frightened away. Naturally, he caught nothing. Several times, the situation was exactly the same as a few days ago. Either he didn't catch the fish, or he let the fish escape in the process. The more he fished, the more Lu Yi felt the difficulty of catching a whitey. This was especially true when it came to fishing after catching the fish. That was truly a battle of wits and courage. Once the fish exerted force, the cultivator would have to release the force. Otherwise, the fishing line would likely break. When the fish did not exert force, the cultivator would have to exert force. Moreover, they would have to control their strength well. Only by letting the fish slip out of the water little by little could they have a chance to catch the fish. The best Lu Yi could do now was to try his best to ensure that the fishing line would not break, but he was undoubtedly still very inexperienced in fishing. This required a long time of immersion in the water to become proficient. A few hours later, a bait pill was consumed. Lu Yi felt that it was about time to carry out his plan. He didn't spend so many spirit jades just to be a fisherman who depended on his luck. If that was the case, there was no need for him to work so hard. Dozens of miles away, on an island reef, a middle-aged man with a cold face who had been sitting cross-legged here looked around. After confirming that no one was watching him, he plunged into the sea. The middle-aged man was naturally Lu Yi, and it was his original body. The one who went to the fishing island was his clone. His face was different because he had activated the thousand-face spirit tattoo. The reason for this arrangement was naturally because once he entered the sea, the consumption of the talent tree's fuel would be huge. His clone couldn't last for too long. Only his original body could persist in the sea. He dove all the way to the bottom of the sea to ensure that no traces could be seen from the surface of the sea. Only then did he rush to the location of his clone. The original body and the clone could sense each other, so the original body easily came to the bottom of the sea in front of the clone and found the fishing line and bait. He originally planned to activate the concealment spirit tattoo to hide himself, so that it would be more convenient for him to do things, but under the interference of the surrounding seawater energy madly eroding his body, he couldn't construct the spirit tattoo on the surface of his body at all. He had no choice but to stand still. A foot in front of him was the hook with the bait pill. "I'm a piece of wood." Before he came, there were a few white spirits swimming around this bait pill. They would take a bite of the bait pill from time to time, but when he came, these white spirits were scared away. As he stood there quietly, more whitey spirits were slowly attracted by the aura of the bait pill and gathered over. Lu Yi observed with rapt attention. He could clearly see how these fellows ate the bait and also clearly see the appearance of these whitey spirits. The head of the white spirit he obtained before was smashed by his punch, so he really didn't know what it looked like. At this moment, this white spirit's head was long and pointed, which caused its mouth to be like an arrow. Moreover, there seemed to be fine fangs in its mouth, which allowed them to quickly take a bite of the bait pill when it passed by. Lu Yi held his breath and waited for a good opportunity. Until a certain moment, a white spirit stopped in front of the bait pill and opened its sharp mouth. It looked like it was going to swallow the bait pill in one bite. Lu Yi's hand was as fast as lightning. He stuck out 2 fingers and clamped the fish's body. The white spirit struggled crazily, and the violent movement scared the other white spirits away. However, since it was clamped by Lu Yi, how could he let it break free so easily? He stretched out his other hand and grabbed it tightly. Success. This white spirit was bigger than the one whose head he had smashed. According to the information provided by Chiu Pingyang, this thing should be easily sold for 5,000 spirit jades. The initial investment would basically be earned back in an instant. However, there were 2 choices in front of Lu Yi. One was to put this white spirit away and find a buyer to sell it. He didn't have to worry about selling this thing. Whether it was the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, other shops, or even the open market, as long as he took it out, people would definitely buy it. Moreover, there wouldn't be a situation where the price would be lowered because this thing was basically in a state where the demand couldn't meet the demand. If Lu Yi was only doing a one-off business, this choice would undoubtedly be more convenient and wouldn't need to think too much. However, he thought that there would be more white spirits in the future. If someone paid attention to him, he wouldn't be able to explain the origin of the white spirit. He couldn't tell people that he went into the sea to catch it. Therefore, he still needed a pretense. Lu Yi buying fishing equipment and fishing here was just a pretense. The white spirit in his hand struggled fiercely. Lu Yi raised his hand, bent his middle finger, and gently flicked the fish's head, flicked and flicked again. He flicked until the white spirit stopped struggling so fiercely. Only then did he remove the bait pill from his hook and hook it up. On the shore, the clone began to raise the fishing line. The fishing line was taut, and one could clearly feel a fish struggling. The anglers on the left and right, and even the cultivators nearby, all gathered their gazes. However, everyone was just looking. Because there were so many people fishing together on Fishing Island, the frequency of catching a fish was still very high. However, catching a fish alone was useless. The key was to get the fish out. Basically, no one would succeed in catching a fish out of hundreds of times. Therefore, everyone was used to it. However, as time passed, a scene that surprised everyone appeared. The fish on Lu Ye's side didn't leave the hook until a certain moment, when a smear of white appeared in the water. Then someone whispered, "It's out of the water, it's out of the water." The clone had already prepared the net. Almost at the same time that the smear of white appeared, he quickly scooped it up. The weight in his hand sank. When he pulled back the net, there was a fresh white spirit in the net. Lu Ye's expression was calm. He stepped forward and removed the hook from the white spirit's mouth. 7 or 8 silhouettes had already arrived in a flash and surrounded him. They were the cultivators who had been looking around earlier. Seeing this situation, Lu Yi didn't panic. This was because when he chatted with Puku before, he knew some of the situation here. The cultivators who were looking around on Fishing Island weren't just those who were bored and wanted to enter this field. There were also some people who came from big factions and were specifically in charge of buying fresh white spirits. The people who had gathered around were undoubtedly the representatives of the various major forces in charge of this matter. One of the old men cupped his fists at Lu Yi and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you look unfamiliar. Are you new here?" Lu Yi nodded. This matter couldn't be hidden from these people who were here all year round. When Lu Yi came here before, he met a few of them. "Is this fish for sale?" the old man asked again. "Yes." The old man nodded and didn't say more. He looked at the white spirit in Lu Ye's hand and said, "I'll pay 4,600 jade for this fish. What do you think?" "That's not right." Lu Yi looked at the others. This old man obviously thought that he was a newcomer and was bullying him for not knowing the rules. Moreover, 4,600 jade was indeed a little too little. The old man smiled. "So someone has taught you. In that case, let's do it according to the rules." The so-called rules were the on-site auction. These big factions were in charge of buying fresh white spirits here. Naturally, they weren't friendly. Every time a white spirit was caught and was willing to be sold, they would bid for it. The highest bidder would get it. Chapter 1390. These people had been buying and selling whitey spirits for years, so they were quite accurate in estimating the price. They could basically guarantee that it would be the most normal price. If they were lucky, they could even sell it for a higher price than usual. For example, Chiu Pingyang was in urgent need of a whitey spirit when he was hosting a banquet. If he had participated in the auction at that time, he would have definitely offered a higher price. The 7 or 8 people talked back and forth, and the price of whitey spirit kept rising. The auction only ended when someone offered 5,300 jades. Lu Yi handed whitey spirit over to the person and received 5,300 jades. The deal was over. Lu Yi did not have to worry about losing money because he would not lose money in this kind of auction. He also saved himself the trouble of finding a buyer. Although he did not have to worry about the demand for whitey spirit, it would still take him a lot of time to return to the island of versatility. The 7 or 8 people around him dispersed and waited for another opportunity. The cultivator who got whitey spirit called for a ferry and left quickly. Obviously, he was going to take it back and deal with it. The fresher whitey spirit was, the more delicious it was, and the more valuable it would be to make it into a pill. Even if it would not go bad in a storage ring, it would not be safe to keep it for a long time. Therefore, normally, once whitey spirit came out of the water, it would either be eaten or made into a pill within 2 or 3 days. No one would keep it no matter what. Lu Yi packed up his fishing equipment and hung the bait pill on the hook again. A jealous voice came from 1,000 feet to his left. The newbie's luck is so good. There was a strange legend in the anglers' circle. It was said that newbies were always lucky. Usually, it was very easy for them to gain something. Of course, it was not always true. Take Ghost Clan for example. After she joined the industry on a whim, she never felt the joy of fishing until she went bankrupt. All she had was endless anxiety, pain, regret, and frustration. Lu Yi had caught something in less than half a day. In the eyes of the experienced fisherman, what else could it be other than good luck? Lu Yi threw the rod into the water and put away the bait pill, leaving an empty hook behind. Then he quickly swam away. He had already caught one fish and it would not be good to catch a second one in a short time. Therefore he could not stay in the water any longer. Taking away the bait pill was to avoid unnecessary waste. This thing was worth hundreds of jades. Dozens of miles away his true body returned. Some people passed by when he was out to sea, but they did not find it strange. There were many cultivators gathered in the Wanxiang Sea. There were bound to be some who were curious about the deep sea and went down to take a look. As long as they did not stop, there would not be much of a problem. Holding a piece of spirit jade in each hand, he sat down cross-legged. While cultivating, he also deduced the defensive spirit rune that he had not completed previously. That was good. When his main body stayed in the sea, it was equivalent to passively cultivating. Furthermore, the cultivation efficiency was extremely high. The only thing he needed to pay was the consumption of the talent tree's fuel. When they returned to the island, they would also cultivate. This way, not only would their cultivation not be delayed, but it would also be faster than normal cultivation. As for his clone, when the time was right, he would be able to catch one. That way he would never be short of spirit jades. Lu Yi suddenly realized that the 10,000 Elephant Sea was indeed a great place. However, he knew that he would not be able to live so comfortably forever. No one was a fool, especially cultivators. Every one of them had lived for God knows how many years and were very cunning. Even if he caught a whitey spirit every few days as time passed, it would definitely attract the attention of others. It did not make sense that Li Taibai was the only one who could catch so many whitey spirits so steadily. Therefore Lu Yi decided to catch a few whitey spirits and not hang them on the hook. He would let his main body change its appearance and send it back to the island of versatility to sell. This plan would last longer and be more discreet. After a few days, without the help of his main body, his clone did not catch anything. Not only did he not catch anything, but even a set of fishing lines was broken. He suffered heavy losses. Of the 3 sets of fishing lines that Ghost sold to him, only the last one was left. When he felt that the time was right, his main body set out again. Just like last time, he lurked beside the hook with the bait pill, waiting for a good opportunity to strike. He caught a whitey spirit and flicked it a few times to make it less active. This way it would be easier to fish. The whole process went smoothly. When Lu Ye's second whitey spirit came out of the water a few days later, the anglers on the left and right were dumbfounded. They had worked hard here for more than 10 days and each of them only caught 1 fish, barely making a loss. However, Lu Yi had caught 2 in just a few days. Was a newbie's luck really that good? The cultivators who were in charge of buying whitey spirits gathered again. This time, the whitey spirits were much bigger than last time, selling for almost 6,000 jades. If the previous one could be considered as earning back the investment, then this one was a profit. In just a few days he had earned more than 6,000 jades. For a loner like Lu Yi, this was undoubtedly very satisfying. A few days later, as Lu Yi caught his third whitey spirit and sold it for more than 5,000 jades, the anglers on the left and right finally could not sit still. It was quite uncomfortable to just look at other people's gains. The anglers on the left and right seemed to know each other. Lu Yi did not know what they were communicating with each other through spiritual sense. Then he saw 2 guys approaching him from the left and right. Immediately, the 2 of them tacitly threw their poles into the water about 10 feet away from Lu Yi. The one on the left was the young man who spoke sourly before. He had a big mole beside his nose, which was very conspicuous. The one on the right was an old man who looked to be in his 50s. Noticing Lu Yi's gaze, the young man did not bother to pay attention to Lu Yi at all. The old man, however, chuckled. "Let's fish together. Fellow Taoist, there seems to be a lot of fish here. You can't catch all of them alone." That was a bit unkind. They were 1,000 feet apart and it was not that these 2 did not catch any fish. They just could not slip up. There was no reason for them to squeeze together with him. Lu Yi guessed that this was probably due to jealousy and unwillingness. The way the two of them were acting could be considered as bullying a newcomer like him. If it were a fight, Lu Yi would not hesitate to cut them with his knife. However, everyone was just fishing. Fighting and killing would be a bit of a killjoy, and it would easily incite public anger. The most important thing was that these two people should have other acquaintances. If Lu Yi really fought with them, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. He only knew Pu Ku, whom he had met by chance, so he couldn't expect him to help him. In the end, being 1,000 feet apart was just a tacit rule. No one asked everyone to do so. Lu Yi glanced at the old man and looked away. He did not say anything. The old man and the young man with the mole looked at each other from a distance. They smiled slightly, looking rather smug. Deep under the sea, Lu Ye's main body swayed and slowly found the location of the old man's bait. To be honest, if the old man was not so close to his clone, it would not have been easy for Lu Yi to find his bait. The 10,000 elephant sea's water suppressed spiritual sense too much. For a mid-stage constellation cultivator like Lu Yi, his spiritual sense could only leave his body by 3 inches. It could be said that spiritual sense was completely useless under the sea. The depths of the sea were dark. Lu Ye's main body could easily find the location of his clone's bait because they could sense each other, and his clone could accurately guide them. If they were really 1,000 feet apart, Lu Yi could only try his luck and find someone else's bait. However, since they were so close, it was much easier to find them. After finding the old man's bait, Lu Ye's main body gently pinched it and exerted force. The old man immediately felt it. His fishing skills were undoubtedly impressive. He only raised the rod slightly and did not use too much force. However, the instant the fishing line was pulled taut, the old man's expression changed. Before he could adjust, the fishing line snapped. Looking at the snapped fishing line, the old man did not feel any heartache. Instead, he was very excited. Big fish. Only a big fish could exert so much force. If such a thing could be fished up, it could easily be sold for tens of thousands of spirit jades or even more. He quickly took out another set of fishing lines, attached the bait, and threw the rod into the water. Lu Ye's main body had already reached the other side. He found the young man with the mole's bait, grabbed it and tugged. Therefore, the young man with the mole suffered the same treatment as the old man. His expression also began to become excited. He secretly imagined how wonderful it would be if he caught a big fish. For the next half a day, the old man and the young man with the mole kept raising the rod. However, without exception, either the bait was lost or the fishing line snapped. Most of the time, the bait was lost. The main thing was that Lu Yi did not know how many sets of fishing lines they had, so he did not want to lose too many. Otherwise, if they ran out of fishing lines and stopped fishing, he would not be able to get more bait. Such an encounter made the old man and the young man with the mole even more certain that they had caught a big fish. This was because ordinary white spirits would take small bites of bait. Only the big fish that exceeded the norm would swallow the bait in one bite because their mouths were big enough. However, as time passed, their expressions began to change from excitement and anticipation to depression and despair. Until a certain moment, the old man looked at the empty fishing hook with a melancholic expression. Why is the fishing today so irritable? The bait he had brought had been used up. In less than 2 hours he had lost more than 3,000 spirit jades. This was something that he had never encountered in his decades of fishing career. He looked at Lu Yi in confusion. "Little friend, is there any movement on your end?" He and the young man with the mole kept raising their rods while Lu Yi was in the middle. However, Lu Ye's end was calm. There were no signs of the fish taking the bait. Obviously something was not right. Lu Yi lifted his rod lightly and picked up an empty fishing hook. He said casually, "I was thinking too much and forgot to use the bait." The old man blinked. He did not know if Lu Yi was telling the truth or not. However, based on his experience with the young man with the mole, Lu Yi had avoided a disaster without using the bait. At the very least, he had reduced unnecessary losses. The old man left disheartened. He wanted to go back to the island of versatility to buy some bait pills. The young man with the mole persisted for a while, but it was inevitable that he would repeat the old man's mistake. He was obviously very angry before he left. This was the most depressing thing for anglers. There was a big fish, but they could not catch it. Chapter 1391. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. In the angler's circle, Lu Yi was gradually becoming famous because, on average, he would get something every few days. This was rare in the angler's circle. It could no longer be explained by luck. In the eyes of the other anglers, Lu Yi had undoubtedly grasped the essence of fishing. He had surpassed them in terms of fishing skills alone. There were still a few people in the circle who were proficient in fishing like Lu Yi. Without exception, these people relied on fishing to make a fortune and satisfy their own cultivation needs. But in comparison, these people had all worked in this field for hundreds of years or even longer. A young beginner angler like Lu Yi was truly unique. This situation was naturally Lu Ye's intention. If not for this, he could have caught as many white spirits as he wanted. But that would definitely attract covetous eyes. The current situation was quite good. With a few old seniors ahead of him, although Lu Ye's gains were coveted, they were not too eye-catching. Apart from the white spirits he fished, Lu Yi would occasionally catch one and have his main body send it back to the island of Versatility to sell. The selling price was not much different from the auction price on the island. At most, it would take a little more time to travel back and forth. Moreover, he did not need to fly anymore. There were many fairies on the island of Versatility. He could summon one for a few spirit jades. The customers he sold his fish to were not fixed. Sometimes, Lu Yi would send his fish to the island of Versatility to sell. Other times he would randomly choose a shop and ask if they wanted to buy fish. Basically, anyone who had the ability to open a shop on the island of Versatility would not refuse his peddling. He rarely went to the scattered markets. The people there were complicated and many people were not wealthy. With so many people, it was not a suitable place for peddling. Fishing and catching, Lu Yi could basically guarantee that he would reap a white spirit every 3 days. In this half a year, the number of spirit jades that passed through his hands was at least 300,000. 300,000 spirit jades was undoubtedly an unimaginable fortune for any mid-stage constellation cultivator. If he only used it for cultivation, he would not have to worry about advancing to Yu Yao. But in reality, Lu Yi couldn't keep these spirit jades in his pocket for too long. This was because every time he obtained spirit jades, he would buy fire-type treasures such as dragon breath crystals to replenish his talent tree's fuel reserves. Regardless of whether it was catching fish or fishing, he would need his main body to enter the myriad phenomenon sea, and he would have to stay there for a long time. This caused the talent tree's fuel to be greatly depleted. Lu Yi only had 1,000 spirit jades in his ring of holding for a long time. Only once did he manage to save up more than 30,000 spirit jades and buy a small star boat. For constellations, if they had the ability, they would need a star boat, which would make it easier for them to travel. However, star boats were too expensive. If a constellation didn't have a powerful background, it would be very difficult for them to accumulate enough money to buy a star boat by themselves. It seemed that he had not gained much from his hard work in the past half a year, but in reality, Lu Yi had made great progress in his cultivation. Every time he entered the Wanxiang Sea, it was a kind of passive and rapid cultivation. To a cultivator, what could be more important than cultivation? Although normal cultivation could increase his cultivation more than going deep into the Wanxiang Sea with the same amount of spirit jades, the time required was many times longer. Lu Ye's actions were equivalent to using spirit jades to buy time. He could advance to late-stage constellation realm faster than other cultivators, but correspondingly, the amount of spirit jades he had to spend was probably 10 times or even more than others. However, as long as he had whitey spirit to fish, this was not a problem. In the Wanxiang Sea, there was an endless supply of whitey spirit. So what if Lu Yi caught sunshine here? No one asked him about his fishing techniques. This was his own secret, and it was also a way to make money. There was no reason for him to share it with others. On the other hand, a few of the cultivators from the major factions who were responsible for keeping watch here expressed their intention to recruit him. To the major factions behind these cultivators, whitey spirit items were precious because they were rare. They could afford to buy as much as they wanted. On this fishing island, not only were there people responsible for buying fish, there were also many people who were responsible for fishing. If they could recruit Lu Yi, they would have a stable channel to buy whitey spirit in the future. This kind of recruitment was very loose. If Lu Yi agreed, not only would he receive a certain amount of spirit jades as his monthly salary, he would also be able to buy the whitey spirit he caught at a normal price. However, he would only be able to sell to the faction that recruited him. In other words, he would become that faction's exclusive angler. Lu Yi naturally refused this kind of recruitment. Cultivators were afraid of restrictions. No matter how loose the restrictions were still restrictions, especially when he didn't have to worry about spirit jades. After half a year, Lu Yi got to know many anglers, but they were all just nodding acquaintances. He slowly became familiar with Puko. Occasionally, when Lu Yi pretended to go back to the Wanxiang Island to buy bait pills, this guy would reserve a fishing spot for him and wait for his return. He was an old angler and was usually generous. Many anglers had received his kindness, so they would still give him face. On this day, the clone was fishing with Puku 1,000 feet away when a beautiful female cultivator passed by. As expected, Puku's gaze was like a leech biting at her, causing the female cultivator to glare at him fiercely. Puku didn't feel awkward. Instead, he smiled gently at the female cultivator. According to him, there were many things in the water. Others only took a sip, but he always took a ladle. However, this guy was handsome, had a beautiful smile, and had a good cultivation base, so he could still win the favor of many female cultivators. Often, as Puku fished, he would tell Lu Yi that he had something to do and had to leave, asking him to help watch the fishing position. In less than half a day at most, he would come back refreshed. As for what he was going to do, Lu Yi didn't know. While Puku was flirting with the female cultivators passing by, under the sea, his main body had already caught a whitey spirit and hung it on Puku's hook. When he first met this guy by chance, he explained a lot of fishing knowledge to him. He even bought him fishing equipment at a cheap price and gave him 2 bait pills for free. Lu Yi didn't forget this favor. Hence, in the past half a year, Lu Yi would occasionally help him catch a fish. After all, his main body was going to hang a fish for his clone. It was just a matter of convenience. He reluctantly watched the beautiful female cultivator leave. Suddenly, a violent wave of spiritual power came from afar. Puku's hand trembled. The fishing line broke. He couldn't care less about the fishing line. He leaped into the air and looked in the direction of the commotion. Lu Yi flew up as well and looked in that direction beside him. They were too far away to see the situation. He only knew that there were experts fighting over there. Sunshine. Puku was shocked. It's sunshine. It was normal to fight and kill on the Wanxiang Sea. However, it was mostly limited to Yu Yao and Yu Yao. At least, Lu Yi had never seen Sunshine fight in the past half a year. He hadn't even seen a Sunshine Realm expert. This was because there were only 2 or 3 Sunshine Realm experts in the entire Wanxiang Sea. Sunshine Realm experts from other galaxies were not allowed to stay here for long. They would leave quickly when they passed by. Under Sunshine, the number of Yu Yao from each galaxy was strictly limited. This was the way the Wanxiang Galaxy managed the Wanxiang Sea. It was also the tacit rule of the 4 galaxies. The experts from the 4 galaxies came here to occupy Spirit Island and divide the resources that belonged to the Wanxiang Galaxy. It was unreasonable. Hence, even if the rules of the Wanxiang Sea were unreasonable, they wouldn't break them easily. Instead, they would help to protect them. If everyone followed the rules, everyone would have meat to eat. If anyone broke the rules, it would only lead to conflict between galaxies. No one would benefit. Hence, when they sensed a Sunshine Realm expert fighting, all the cultivators on Fishing Island were shocked. They didn't know what was going on. Lu Yi had only been here for a short time, but the others had been here for many years. As far as they could remember, there was no precedent of a Sunshine Realm expert fighting in the Wanxiang Sea. Suddenly, a shout came from that direction. "How dare you!" Another shout came. "Stop!" Then an even more intense fight broke out. The cultivators on the fishing island all looked solemn. If they had only sensed one Sunshine Realm expert fighting, then it wasn't just one now. There were 3 or 4 of them. They didn't know where the Sunshine Realm expert who attacked first came from. However, the one who attacked later was definitely a Sunshine Realm expert from the Wanxiang Galaxy. They were guarding this place. When they sensed something unusual, they naturally had to intervene. During the fight, the originally calm sea rippled and turned into waves. The waves surged from the direction of the fight. It was obvious how fierce the aftermath was. Suddenly, the aura of an expert disappeared. Puku's eyes almost popped out. Lu Yi also narrowed his eyes. They turned to look at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. If their senses weren't wrong, a Sunshine Realm expert had died. In other words, a Sunshine Realm expert was killed in the fight just now. How long had it been? From the start of the fight until now, it had only been a few dozen breaths and Sunshine had already died. They didn't know if it was the one who started the fight or the local Sunshine Realm expert who guarded the Wanxiang Island. The aftermath of the fight wasn't over yet. Puku couldn't help but shrink his neck. The sky is falling. It was certain that the one who died was the Wanxiang Galaxy Sunshine. If it was the troublemaker who died, then the fight should have ended by now. Since the fight was still going on, it meant that the troublemaker wasn't killed. This was the Wanxiang Galaxy, the Wanxiang Sea. If their Sunshine Realm expert was killed, it would be a slap in the face. How could the Wanxiang Galaxy let this go? If it was only Xingxiu and Yueyao who died, it wouldn't have much of an impact. However, if it was Sunshine, then the significance was completely different. Haha, the Wanxiang Galaxy is just SOSO. The laughter of an old man suddenly came from the direction of the battle. Remember, this is only the interest. Oh no. Puku whispered. They're coming toward us. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Lu Yi falling down from the corner of his eye. He cursed Li Tai for his lack of loyalty and quickly descended. Chapter 1392. The reactions of the constellations were not slow. When they noticed the fight between Rizhao and the others, they all flew up to the sky to observe. Now that they realized something was wrong, they immediately fell down like dumplings, afraid that they would block the other party's path and be killed. If they were killed, there would be no place for them to complain. When Puku landed, Lu Yi had already thrown out array flags in all directions. He activated his spiritual power and constructed his spirit patterns, instantly forming an array. Puku did not hesitate to squeeze together with Lu Yi. When Lu Yi set up the array, he also took out a defensive spiritual treasure and covered the surroundings. In an instant, a layer of light screen circulated. The others were all using their own methods to protect themselves. A majestic aura swept over from the direction of the fight. It was so fast that even the fairy could not compare to it. In the blink of an eye, a figure swept across the sky above the fishing island. Although he did not use any means, his violent aura spread out in all directions, squeezing the void. Puku's protective spiritual treasure and Lu Ye's protective array creaked as if they were under heavy pressure at this moment. Lu Yi looked up to see who it was that dared to cause trouble on the Wanxiang Sea and even kill the local star system's Rizhao. With a quick glance, he vaguely saw an old man with wild hair and beard. The old man flashed past the fishing island and disappeared into the distance. 2 breaths later, another 2 figures flew over, one after the other. Obviously, it was the local star system's Rizhao who was chasing after them. No one knew if he could catch up with them. The entire fishing island was silent. Everyone was shocked. After a long time, they slowly came back to their senses. Lu Yi withdrew the array and Puku put away his spiritual treasure with a face full of lingering fear. Fortunately, the 2 of them reacted quickly and reacted immediately when they realized something was wrong. Otherwise, just the violent aura of the 3 Rizhao when they flew over was enough to injure them. 1 against 3 and even kill the Rizhao. Who is this person? Puku was shocked, but there was also some longing in his shock. The matter was obvious. On the Wanxiang Sea, there were 3 local star systems Rizhao. The troublemaker killed one of them, and then the remaining 2 chased after him. They were all under the sun, and even if their cultivation levels were different, it was still extremely difficult to accomplish such a thing in such an environment. How would Lu Yi know who the other party was? He was just a Xingqiu mansion, so he was not qualified to inquire about such matters. Furthermore, he did not have any channels to do so. However, judging from the old man's words, it was clear that he had a grudge against the Wanxiang galaxy. In the starry skies, revenge was a common occurrence. What was abnormal was that this was a fight between 2 people in the Sunshine Realm, and in the Wanxiang Sea. Lu Yi thought that this matter would cause a storm, but he didn't expect that the Vientiane galaxy didn't do anything out of the ordinary when Nicho was killed. They didn't even sense any movement from the Vientiane galaxy. The entire 10,000 Elephant Sea was the same as before. However, this matter obviously wouldn't end just like this. Lu Yi reckoned that the Myriad Phenomenon galaxy was definitely working in secret. Puku even speculated that the killer had already been killed by the Wanxiang galaxy, which was why there was no movement from the Wanxiang galaxy. Lu Yi didn't think so. If the troublemaker had been killed, the Wanxiang galaxy would definitely spread the news to regain their reputation. However, since they didn't spread the news, it meant that the troublemaker was still alive and well. These things were of a high level after all. It wasn't something that someone like him, who had no foundation or channels, could understand. He stayed on Fishing Island for a long time as usual. There was no news from Chaoxiang. Although the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce had comprehensive information, it wasn't easy to obtain information from a certain galaxy if they didn't have any interaction with it. His doppelganger was fishing, and his main body was usually meditating on a reef island, cultivating and deducing spirit runes at the same time, except when he needed to go into the sea to catch fish. After half a year, a new protective spirit rune based on defense had been finalized. The overall effect had met Lu Ye's requirements and was enough to support a Xingqiu realm battle. Lu Yi named it Sacred Guard. This was the 3rd new spirit rune he deduced with the help of the talent tree, based on his own attainments in the Tao of Spirit Runes, in addition to Void and Divine Blade. The next rune to be deduced was Twin Breath and Branch. The reason he chose this spirit rune was naturally because of the formation disc. Before reaching the Xingqiu realm, the twin breath and branch formation disk had played a huge role. Whether it was during the bloody battle in the insect race's secret realm or during the expedition to the blood refinement realm, the formation disk had greatly reduced the losses of the 9 states. However, when once cultivation reached the constellation realm, the range of movement would increase, and the effects of the formation disk would be greatly weakened. Unless it was a formation battle like the one in the Black Abyss to protect one's own camp. In a battle at the constellation realm, the existing Samsara connected chi formation disk was already useless. The 9 states didn't have any high-end combat power at the moment. They were all at the early Xingqiu realm. Even if Lu Yi left behind a few purple talismans and jade talismans, how many dangers could they deal with? Who knew how many years it would take for these early Xingqiu realm cultivators to advance to Yuyao? Therefore, the 9 states' greatest weakness was their lack of ability to compete with the strong. Even if they couldn't fight against the sun, they needed to at least have the ability to fight against Yuyao. The twin breath and branch formation disk was a hope, but the premise was that Lu Yi could deduce a twin breath and branch spirit rune that could cover a larger range and meet the needs of the Xingqiu realm during battle. With his current attainments in the Tao of spirit runes and his previous successful experiences, Lu Yi felt that this wasn't difficult. He just needed to spend some time. In fact, he already had some ideas about this new twin breath and branch spirit rune. He would be able to successfully deduce it in a few months because he now had a lot of time to do this. 2 months later, on Fishing Island, Lu Yi stood with a frown on his face. The situation wasn't right. In the past, no matter where he chose to fish here, a fish would come to eat the bait in an hour at most. However, several hours had passed today, and there wasn't even any movement from the bait. His original body swam under the sea for a while, but he didn't see any trace of whitey. It wasn't like this yesterday. Just yesterday, Lu Yi caught a whitey to sell. It was as if Bai Ling had disappeared without a trace overnight. What made Lu Yi even more surprised was that the anglers actually began to put away their fishing poles one after another, shaking their heads and flying away from Fishing Island with disappointment. Puku wasn't here. He didn't know which female cultivator he was hooking up with. Lu Yi sent a message over wanting to ask about the situation. Not long after, Puku replied. It should be the fish stillness period. What the hell? Lu Yi had a bad feeling. In the mortal ocean, those fishes will swim with the current. During certain seasons, they will migrate from one location to another. Although whitey is not a mortal fish, they also have this characteristic. Every few years, they will collectively disappear for a period of time. This is the silent period of the fish. Lu Yi was completely dumbfounded. Where did they go? No one knows. In the past, during the fish stillness period, the anglers also looked around to find their traces, but they didn't find any. Therefore, it was speculated that they ran to the deep sea during the fish stillness period. How long will it take for them to come back? Lu Yi was still counting on them to cultivate. How could they be gone so soon? It's hard to say. Sometimes they come back every few months. Sometimes they come back after a few years or more. I'm busy here. I'll talk to you in detail later. After ending the message with Puku, Lu Yi was stunned for a long time. He thought that he could cultivate leisurely in this 10,000 elephant sea, advance to the late stage Yuyao and then Rizhao. After all, whitey's resources in the 10,000 elephant sea were incomparably abundant. He had special fishing methods that could completely satisfy his needs. However, things didn't go as he wished. He suddenly entered the fish stillness period. He couldn't blame Puku for not telling him this in advance. The fish stillness period was completely unpredictable. Even the length of time it would last was different. Before whitey disappeared en masse, no one knew when the fish stillness period would come. Only when it came could experienced anglers judge from some traces. Those anglers who left in disappointment were undoubtedly experienced anglers. Knowing that the fish stillness period was over, they didn't waste their efforts here. Lu Yi didn't give up. His original body searched everywhere under the sea. He even went 1,000 miles under the sea. Not to mention whitey, he didn't even see a ghost. He didn't dare to go any deeper. 1,000 miles was nothing to the constellations in the starry sky, but it was different in the deep sea. Especially in the 10,000 elephant sea, the fuel for his talent tree was greatly consumed. If he couldn't fish now, he wouldn't be able to earn money at will to buy fire attribute treasures in the future. The anglers on Fishing Island had all left. Even the cultivators of the major forces who were in charge of waiting here to buy fish had all left. Lu Yi was all alone, looking lonely. His original body returned and recalled his clone. He was at a loss. Although the 10,000 elephant sea was vast, Lu Yi didn't know where to go. After a while, Lu Ye's expression became determined. No matter what, first of all he had to make money. He only had 1,000 spirit jades on hand. According to his current cultivation speed, he would use them all up in 2 months. Without enough spirit jades he wouldn't be able to meet his cultivation needs. If he was in another galaxy, Lu Yi could still go deep into the starry sky to look for spirit jades to replenish his consumption. However, this was the Wanxiang galaxy. Cultivators came and went from all over the galaxy. Even if there were spiritual jades, they would have been taken away immediately. How could they wait for him? Although he couldn't enter the starry sky to look for spirit jades, there were still many ways to make money on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. When he was fishing with Puku, he had learned a lot of survival skills from him, so Lu Yi now had some goals. After collecting his thoughts and fishing equipment, Lu Yi took out a star map and confirmed the location of a place called Laika Island. Then he took out the star boat he bought for 30,000 spirit jades and flew in that direction. Chapter 1393. Unless one had a custom-made planetary boat, the ones bought on the island of Versatility were basically all standard planetary boats. In other words, they were not unique, but there were many identical ones. Lu Ye's planetary boat was not the cheapest one, but it was definitely not expensive compared to other planetary boats that cost hundreds to hundreds of thousands. In terms of size and performance, it was not as good as the silver fish. It was only after coming to the 10,000 Elephant Sea that Lu Yi realized how valuable the gift from Su Yuqing was. If he sold the silver fish, it would definitely be worth more than 100,000 spirit jades. It was a pity that he was short-sighted and did not realize it in time. Laika Island was a place where the various powers of the 10,000 Elephant Sea, as well as individual groups, would recruit people. It was also an important way for most constellations to make a living here. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was filled with opportunities. There were ways to become rich overnight, and there were also ways to slowly accumulate wealth. Once a cultivator arrived at this place, as long as they could endure hardships, they would not have to worry about not being able to earn spiritual jades. Of course, how much they could earn depended on their own abilities. The solitary fish period was over, and he did not know how long it would last. Although there was still a lot of fuel left in the talent tree, it was not enough to support Lu Yi to cultivate in the island of Versatility for a long time. Therefore he had to find a way to earn spiritual jades. At the very least, he had to satisfy his monthly consumption for cultivation. He had heard Puku mention Jiaolei Island many times, but he had been too busy fishing to visit it. Riding the planetary boat and following the guidance of the star chart, he arrived at Jiaolei Island in less than half a day. Looking from afar, he could see that the island was bustling with activity. Numerous cultivators were entering and exiting the spiritual island like carps crossing the river. Jiaolei Island was a deserted island that was not occupied by any forces. Anyone could enter and leave freely. When he arrived near the spiritual island, Lu Yi kept his planetary boat and looked around in the air for a while before entering the island in a flash. Although this was an ungoverned land and there was no overall plan, and the number of cultivators entering and exiting was huge, it was not messy. Instead, there was a sense of order. There were rows of jade boards on the whole Jiaolei Island. The jade boards should be the materials used by spiritual tattooists for practice. They were not expensive and could be found easily. One spiritual jade could buy a large piece. Every single jade board had words written on it, and the cultivators that came and went only had to glance at it to know which power was recruiting people, and the requirements and conditions were clearly written on it. If they were able to satisfy the requirements, then they would be able to contact the owner of the jade board and discuss it with them. Some of the jade boards had cultivators waiting beside them. They were either sitting or standing. Presumably they were the ones who posted the recruitment notice. There were also some jade boards that had no one beside them, but there were notes left behind. Those who were interested could use the notes to contact the employer and discuss in detail. Jiaolei Island had existed for countless years, so even though no one managed it, it had its own set of rules that the cultivators who came here would voluntarily follow. Lu Yi followed the crowd to a jade board. Looking up, he saw a line of words written on it. Zhoutian Island is recruiting a large number of guards on a long-term basis. The pay is excellent. Those who are interested can talk face to face. A man with a pale face and no beard stood beside it. He should be the employer who posted the recruitment notice. Someone was communicating with him through spiritual sense. After a while he shook his head and left. After that person left, Lu Yi also went up to talk to the employer, but he also left in disappointment. There was no other reason. The monthly salary offered was a little low, only a little more than 100 spiritual jades. Such a monthly salary might be able to satisfy the cultivation needs of most middle-stage constellation cultivators, but for Lu Yi, it was still far from enough. He continued to walk forward and looked around. Soon, Lu Yi found that the recruitment notice did not mention the pay. They all needed to be discussed with the employer. He talked to a few people but none of them met his expectations. After a while he passed by a jade board. Lu Yi's eyes lit up. It was also a recruitment notice, but the monthly salary was clearly stated. It was a total of 800 spiritual jades. Such a price was undoubtedly high compared to the monthly salary offered by other powers. However, not many people were interested in it and no one discussed it in front of the employer. Lu Yi knew that there was something fishy going on. However, in order to understand the mystery, he still went up to talk to the employer. He then found out the reason why the employer offered such a high price. The spiritual island that the employer was from might be going to war with another power soon. They were lacking in manpower, so they urgently needed help. Otherwise they would not offer such a high price. After knowing the stakes, Lu Yi immediately lost interest. Even though the employer said that the war was only a possibility, Lu Yi did not intend to risk his life for them. He was just a middle-stage constellation cultivator from outside. Why would he be interested in getting involved in the dispute between two powers? It would be fine if he won the fight, but if he lost he might lose his life. Moreover, even if he won the fight, when the employer's power did not need so many guards, the monthly salary would definitely be reduced. Therefore, even though the monthly salary of 800 spiritual jades was attractive, it was not a long-term solution. In the next few days, Lu Yi walked around the recruitment island. However, no matter how he looked, he could not find anything suitable. He could not help but feel helpless. Previously, when he was fishing, a whitey spirit was worth a few thousand spiritual jades. Now that he was here, he was faced with a monthly salary of 1 to 200 spiritual jades. If it was someone else, they might not be able to eat pickled vegetables after being used to delicacies. However, Lu Yi was born in a small place, so he did not feel too disappointed. He did not have high requirements either. It would be good if he could satisfy his daily cultivation needs. It would be best if he could have some surplus. However, his cultivation consumption was much higher than that of a normal constellation cultivator. It would be difficult to satisfy his requirements. Just as Lu Yi was having a headache, the musical note suddenly reacted. He took it out to check. He was delighted and immediately soared into the sky. In midair, he summoned his planetary boat and flew towards the island of Versatility. Half a day later, he arrived at the island of Versatility. He went straight in and came to the private room that he always visited. Chao Xiang was waiting. When he saw Lu Yi, he stood up and bowed. "Fellow cultivator Li." Lu Yi hurriedly returned the greeting and said, "Is the information accurate?" Chao Xiang smiled faintly. "There's no problem with the source of the information. Our island of Versatility specializes in gathering information. As for whether it's accurate or not, no one dares to guarantee it. After all, this is information obtained through investigation. Therefore, fellow cultivator Li needs to verify it for himself." Lu Yi nodded. Chao Xiang's words were reasonable. It would be unreasonable to expect him to guarantee the accuracy of the information at this time. Chao Xiang handed over a jade slip to Lu Yi. "The detailed information is all here. Fellow Taoist will know after checking it. I have to apologize to fellow Taoist for the delay in this matter." With the Island of Versatility's ability, it would not take too long to gather information. However, the Jade Conch Galaxy was too remote and had no contact with the Island of Versatility. This was why it had been delayed until today. The Jade Slip contained information about the Jade Conch Galaxy. Lu Yi carefully checked it and found that according to the Jade Slip, if he wanted to return to the Jade Conch Galaxy, he would first have to enter a galaxy called Sky Spill, then cross the entire Sky Spill Galaxy and enter a galaxy called Cloud Shine. After that, he would arrive at the Jade Conch Galaxy. In other words, if he wanted to return to the Jade Conch Galaxy, he would have to cross a full 2 galaxies. The source of the information was a cultivator from the Sky Spill Galaxy. He had never been to the Jade Conch Galaxy and had only come into contact with people from the Cloud Shine Galaxy. As for how the people from the Cloud Shine Galaxy knew about the Jade Conch Galaxy, if the 2 galaxies were neighbors, it was normal for them to have some intersection. Judging from the information in the Jade Slip, the source of the information was somewhat complicated and very reliable. However, as Chao Xiang said, it was difficult to guarantee its accuracy. Lu Yi would have to check it himself. Originally, fellow cultivator would have to pay another 700 jade, but it has been delayed for a long time. How about this? Fellow cultivator will pay another 500 jade. Chao Xiang took the initiative to lower the price. They had previously agreed that he would pay 1,000 jade for information. Lu Yi paid 300 as a deposit, so there were still 700 jade left. Lu Yi did not hold back and readily handed over the 500 jade. With this he only had 500 jade left, making him look even poorer. After leaving the island of versatility, Lu Yi pinched his note talisman and sent a message before flying away. A day later, on a reef island in the Thousand Elephant Sea, Lu Yi, who had changed his appearance, sat cross-legged and waited. After a short while, a figure flew over from the distance and saw Lu Yi from afar, revealing a suspicious look. Lu Yi's divine sense surged as he sent a voice transmission. The person flew over and landed in front of Lu Yi, sizing him up before asking in surprise, "Little friend, what kind of secret technique is this?" This old master couldn't see any flaws in it and thought I had come to the wrong place. Lu Yi casually replied, "Since I'm not strong enough, I have to have some means of disguise. Old Tang, take a look at this." Saying so, he handed over the jade slip he obtained from Chao Xiang. The one who came was naturally Tang Jun. Since the two of them came to the Thousand Elephant Sea, they had not contacted each other. This was also the first time the two of them had met since last time. Tang Jun received the jade slip and checked it, raising his brow after a short while. "Where did this information come from?" "I asked the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce," Lu Yi replied. Tang Jun nodded. "I guessed so. This old master had thought of this method before, but in the end this old master is Yu Yao, and the target is too obvious." "I thought you would use this method, so I didn't." This old man was undoubtedly a cautious person. Whenever he went out, he would do his best to conceal his identity as much as possible, lest he provoked someone he shouldn't provoke and bring disaster to his homeland. "Have you heard of Sky Spill Galaxy and Cloud Shine Galaxy?" Lu Yi asked. This old man had a lifespan of 3,000 years and was a Yu Yao middle-stage cultivator. Lu Yi did not believe that this old man had not gone out when he was young. Perhaps he knew something about these two galaxies. So, this information was very reliable. End of chapter. Chapter 1394. To Lu Yi's slight disappointment, Tang Jun shook his head and said, "I've never heard of it. As you know, once we leave our domain, the direction radiates in all directions. Although I've been to a few nearby galaxies, I dare not say that I know everything about Jade Conch. Perhaps I know more about Jade Conch Domain." Jade Conch Galaxy was named after the Jade Conch Domain. It was the well-deserved leader of the galaxy. Although there was no sunlight, there were many moon blossoms. It was much stronger than the old man's Qingli Dao domain. The old man sighed again. "In the end, our galaxy is still out of touch with the mainstream of the universe. I didn't think much of it before, but after coming to the Wanxiang Sea, I realized that we're still frogs in a well." Holding the jade slip in his hand, he looked at Lu Yi and asked, "What do you plan to do?" "Go back," Lu Yi said matter-of-factly. He didn't know the location of Jade Conch Galaxy before, but now that he knew, he had to go back. It wasn't that he missed his hometown. He hadn't been out for long, so he didn't miss it. What he considered was to go back first and figure out the path. In this way, even if the insect path couldn't be formed in the future, if the cultivators of this domain wanted to come to the Wanxiang Sea, they could fly over directly. If this domain wanted to develop and grow, it wouldn't work if they just admired themselves. They had to connect with the mainstream of the universe. The Wanxiang Galaxy was a good place and also an opportunity. Of course, the journey across two galaxies wouldn't be short. Even though Lu Yi had a star boat now, it would definitely take 3 to 5 years. "We should go back." Tang Jun nodded. "Do you want to go back or should I?" Lu Yi was stunned. "You don't want to go back?" Tang Jun said, "Of course. I'm old and don't have many years left to live. Even if I die, I don't want to be buried in a foreign land. I still hope to return to my roots. But first of all, we can't tell if this information is accurate. If it's wrong, we'll just be wasting our time if we go back together. Another possibility is that this information is accurate and we can return to Jade Conch. We don't have to go back together. One will go and figure out the path and the other will stay and develop here. When the cultivators of our two domains come here in the future, we can more or less take care of them." It had to be said that the old man's consideration was comprehensive. When Lu Yi received the jade slip, he only wanted to return to Jade Conch Galaxy. Now that she heard what he said, she indeed felt that the best arrangement was for one to stay and one to leave. "I'll go. You stay." Lu Yi immediately made his decision. In the end, the 9 provinces was still a little weak. Moreover, Lu Yi did not want to tell others about the specific location of the 9 provinces, not even Tang Jun. In this old man's mind, he was just a cultivator from the Wuxia continent. Therefore, if one of them had to go back, he would be the best choice. Tang Jun was shrewd with age. How could he not see Lu Ye's misgivings? He nodded and said, "Then we'll arrange it that way. But how are you going to enter the Sky Spill Galaxy?" Normally, using the insect path was the only way. They couldn't just fly over. The Sky Spill star system had a stable insect path that led directly to the Myriad Phenomenon star system. Otherwise, there wouldn't be cultivators from the Sky Spill star system here. Cultivators from this galaxy could naturally enter and exit the insect passage as they pleased, but if they were not from this galaxy, they would need someone to be their guarantor. This was because there were powerhouses from the Sky Spill star system guarding the 2 ends of the insect path. If one barged in without a guarantor, they would die in vain. Basically, every galaxy's insect path was guarded by a local powerhouse. One reason was to prevent the local cultivators from being ambushed when they entered the Myriad Phenomenon star system. Another reason was to prevent people from using the insect path to invade the local galaxy. If one day the Jade Conch Galaxy's insect path stabilized and allowed people to pass through safely, the Jade Conch Galaxy would also need to dispatch powerhouses to guard the entrances and exits of the insect path. All cultivators entering and exiting the insect path would have to be checked before they could pass through. Lu Yi did not have much interaction with people from the Sky Spill star system, nor did he know any cultivators from the Sky Spill star system. Naturally, there was no one to vouch for him. "Do you have a way?" Lu Yi asked. Tang Jun shook his head. "This old man is powerless. Then I'll think of something myself." Looking up at the old man, Lu Ye's eyelids drooped. He said, "Old Tang, this journey will take at least a few years. The journey is not safe. Do you have anything you can sponsor? For example, a planetary boat, a treasure of suppressing realms, or something like that?" Tang Jun squinted at him. "I've already given you my storage ring. What else do you want? Besides, don't you have the red talisman with you? Even if Yu Yao bullies you, so what? You can kill the red talisman of the dwarf clan." Lu Yi said, "You can't say that. You said it yourself that you don't have many years left to live. If you burp before I come back, won't your things benefit others? We're from the same galaxy after all. Give me your inheritance and I'll bring it back to the Green Dawn Dao world. It can be considered as passing it on." Tang Jun snorted. "Don't worry, I won't die before you come back. You should at least give me some travel expenses. I don't have much time to search for spiritual jades along the way. I don't have any left." The old man was speechless. This was the first time he heard of travel expenses. However, if Li Taibai could really return to Jade Conch, the Green Dawn Dao world would need him to inform them. He took out a storage ring and handed it to Lu Yi. "I don't have any more. Take it or leave it. I don't dare to refuse a gift from an elder. How can I not take it?" Lu Yi took the storage ring and looked at it. There were less than 2,000 spiritual jades in it. The old man was quite generous. Lu Yi silently remembered this favor. "I'll leave you a jade slip. When you return to Jade Conch, pass it to Wuxia when you go to the Green Dawn Dao world. He will cooperate with you." Tang Jun handed him another jade slip. Wuxia was the 3rd Yu Yao in the Green Dawn Dao world. Lu Yi took it and put it away solemnly. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Tang Jun looked at him with a serious expression. "Don't die on the way." The world was unpredictable. The old man and the young man who used to be enemies were now in a foreign place. Now that they were in the same boat, Tang Jun naturally hoped that Lu Ye's journey would go as smoothly as possible. Lu Yi jumped up and laughed. "Don't die before I come back." How to enter the Sky Spill star system was a problem. The most appropriate method was naturally to befriend a cultivator from the Sky Spill star system, gain their trust, and have them act as a guarantor. Then, they would be able to enter safely. However, these cultivators from the various star systems did not have their origins engraved on their foreheads, so how would Lu Yi know who was from the Sky Spill star system? Asking the Plenitude Commerce Hall for information was one way. However, Lu Yi was reluctant to pay 1,000 spiritual jades for a piece of information. Moreover, even if he did find a Sky Spill cultivator, why would he make friends with him and trust him? He could also try his luck at the worm path that led to Sky Spill. There must be a strong cultivator from Yu Yao guarding there. If he told them his intention honestly and said that he wanted to borrow the Sky Spill path, it might work. However, it was more likely that he would be rejected. After thinking about it, there was only one way. Zhaolai Island. Lu Yi had stayed at Zhaolai Island for a few days. The recruitment there was not only about the various spiritual islands recruiting guards, but also about other kinds of information, including the transportation of resources. The Plenitude Ocean had frequent transactions. The amount of resources it took in every day was enormous. Some people brought local specialties here to sell, while others bought resources here and sent them back to their home world. The journey was not necessarily peaceful. There were all kinds of people here. When Lu Yi had just arrived at the Plenitude Galaxy, he had even been robbed by a group of people. Therefore, if there was a need to transport resources, someone would be needed to escort them. If there were enough people in their home world, they naturally did not need to hire anyone. If there were not enough, they could only come to Zhaolai Island to find someone. Lu Yi wanted to come here to see if there were any sky spill cultivators recruiting people. The probability was not high, but it was better than trying his luck with Yu Yao. He had thought that even if there was hope, it would take a long time. If there was no other way, he could only ask the Plenitude Commerce Hall for information and find a sky spill cultivator to make friends with, who knew that in less than half a day after arriving at Zhaolai Island, he would find the recruitment information he needed on a jade board. Just as he had expected, they needed to recruit a few people to escort a batch of resources back to a certain realm in the Sky Spill Galaxy. Then, they would escort another batch of resources back to the Plenitude Ocean. A middle-aged man stood beside the jade board. He had not activated his spirit power, so Lu Yi could not tell his cultivation level. However, he was probably a Star Mansion cultivator. Lu Yi stepped forward, cupped his fists and said, "Brother, please?" The middle-aged man sized Lu Yi up and said directly, "One round trip is 1,500 jade pieces. 500 is the deposit and 1,000 is the balance. If you are satisfied we can talk. If you are not, please leave." 1,500 jade pieces was not a low price. A round trip would take at least 4 to 5 months. On average it would be 300 to 400 spirit jades per month. It was higher than the monthly salary of ordinary spiritual islands recruiting guards. After all, the risks in space were high. Lu Yi had seen a lot of recruitment information before. He knew that this price was fair. Moreover, he was not here for spirit jades. He nodded immediately. Sure. Lu Yi discussed some details with the middle-aged man. They exchanged musical notes and agreed to call him when they were about to depart. Then Lu Yi left Zhaolai Island. This mission required a round trip. In other words, even if Lu Yi went to the Sky Spill Galaxy, he would have to come back. This was not consistent with his planned itinerary. Even if he entered the Sky Spill Galaxy, he would not be able to shake off the middle-aged man and act alone. This would easily arouse the middle-aged man's hostility. In the future, it would not be easy for the people of the Jade Conch Galaxy to borrow the Sky Spill Galaxy. Lu Yi planned to use these few months to build a good relationship with the middle-aged man. If he could get the middle-aged man to vouch for him, he would be familiar with Yu Yao, who was guarding the insect path. Then, everything else would not be a problem. The middle-aged man did not make Lu Yi wait for too long. He received a message 2 days later. When Lu Yi arrived at the meeting place, he found that there were 2 other people besides the middle-aged man. End of chapter. Chapter 1395. Apart from Lu Yi and the middle-aged man who posted the recruitment notice, there was also an old man and a young man with a crew cut. They exchanged names with each other. Lu Yi naturally reported Li Taibai's name. The middle-aged man was called Zhu Yuan, the old man was called Fan Yunhua, and the young man with a crew cut called himself Jiayu. No one bothered to investigate the authenticity of these names. It was common for cultivators to hide their true names and backgrounds when they traveled outside. After all, this was only a short-term cooperation. Even if it was the employer, Zhu Yuan, he would not be qualified to investigate the details of the people he recruited. Pay for labor, take the money to work, that was the way it was. However, what made Lu Yi slightly puzzled was that among the 4 of them, his cultivation was the lowest. The other 3 were all at the late stage of the constellation realm. Speaking of which, when Zhu Yuan recruited him, he didn't seem to have asked about his cultivation level. He offered $1,500 right off the bat. The price of the jade, and then everyone agreed on it in a few words. Perhaps this was his style of doing things, or perhaps his eyesight was outstanding, and he could tell that Lu Ye's cultivation was not low. No matter what, since he had already joined this small group, everyone would be on the same side before the end of the mission. Everyone is here, let's go. This trip will take about a few months, and I hope that the 3 of you can work together with me to overcome the difficulties. Zhu Yuan said. Lu Yi frowned. Don't you need to go to Fair Island? Although this was the first time he had taken on such a job, he had seen pigs run before. Especially after hanging out with Puku for half a year, he had learned a lot from him about surviving in the myriad elephant sea. Under normal circumstances, Zhu Yuan had recruited 3 helpers like this to escort the supplies back to the Sky Spill Galaxy. Before leaving, he would definitely have to make a trip to Fair Island. Because he couldn't guarantee that he would confess. Whether the 3 people he recruited were good people or not, whether they would have any bad intentions halfway through, this required some special screening methods. Of course, this kind of screening method could not specifically distinguish between good and bad cultivators, but it could be used to determine the strength of a cultivator through certain comparisons. Fair Island was named Fair Island, and what it did was also Fair Island's business. There was a treasure created by the joint efforts of the Wanxiang Galaxy and many other galaxies. It was called the Zhongxing Book. Recruitment notices were posted on Laika Island. Employers who managed to recruit people had the right to take them to the Zhongxing Book. Just like now, Zhu Yuan could bring the 3 of them to Zhongxing Island and leave their aura imprints on the Zhongxing Book. Through the aura imprints, he could check their past missions and see how many times they had been recruited, how many times they had completed, and how many times they had failed. He could even see the evaluations left by their previous employers. If this mission was successfully completed, Zhu Yuan could also do the same. Therefore, when he returned, he would leave a suitable comment based on the performance of the 3 during the mission. Of course, if the mission wasn't completed or if Zhu Yuan died halfway, then the 3 of them would inevitably have an additional number of mission failures added to their resume. This was also a stain that cultivators who made a living doing this were unable to erase. What was left on the Zhongxing Book was not a name, so no matter what name was used, as long as there was no change in the aura, the Zhongxing Book could be used to trace a cultivator's resume in the Wanxiang Sea. It could be said that the existence of the Zhongxing Book greatly regulated and restrained the temperament of many cultivators. Which cultivator who was looking for a job on Laika Island didn't want their resume to be perfect? Who would be willing to leave a stain on their resume? It could be said that a good resume would make it easier for cultivators to find a livelihood. On the other hand, if the resume was too difficult, it would be easier for cultivators to find a way to survive. Also, no one would hire them. Even if there were, no one would bear to use them. In the Wanxiang Galaxy, there were many gangs that specialized in robbing and robbing. Some of them did it because of their nature, hoping to use this method to make a fortune, but there were also many people who couldn't find work on Jiaolei Island. Their records on the Central Official Book were too bad, and no employers were willing to hire them. They had no choice but to resort to robbing and robbing. Lu Yi had never left his aura on the Zhongxing Book, so his resume was naturally blank, but that might not be the case for Fan Yunhua and Jiayu. Since they were transporting supplies back to the Sky Evolution Galaxy, Zhu Yuan must have a lot of good things on him. Bringing the 3 of them to the Zhongxing Island to leave their auras and investigate was also a kind of insurance. Lu Yi kindly reminded them to leave a good impression on his first employer. After all, he had to find a way to make friends with them in the following journey. Unexpectedly, Zhu Yuan shook his head and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. There are many people on the Zhongxing Island. Just waiting in line will probably take a few days. This batch of material consultation is a simple question. Ask first page female general, Gong CI is not allowed." He smiled and looked meaningfully at the 3 of them. "Also, I believe in my own judgment." Lu Yi reckoned that Zhu Yuan believed in his own ability more than his judgment. However, he faintly felt that something was not quite right. Whether it was Zhu Yuan's previous solicitation of him, or his current behavior, they all seemed too casual. In any case, if he were in Zhu Yuan's position and shouldered the responsibility of transporting supplies back to the domain, it was impossible for him to be so careless. Besides, even if they were in a hurry, a few days could not be delayed. This trip would take a few months. However, to people who were hired, their employer was the heavens and the earth. Whatever the employer said, there was no room for argument. Zhu Yuan summoned a planetary ship, and the 4 of them boarded one after another. After a short while, the planetary ship turned into a stream of light and flew into the distance. The journey was relatively boring. Zhu Yuan sat in the center of the formation to control the ship. He closed a wine jar and did not travel for the voyage. Tu Yunhua would occasionally take a sip. The young man Jiayu closed his eyes and rested. Since Lu Yi had nothing to do, he simply continued to deduce his kindred spirit rune. Of course, he did not completely immerse himself in it. Instead, he left a part of his mind to be vigilant. Since he had sensed that something was not quite right, he naturally had to be more vigilant. The planetary ship left the 10,000 Elephant Sea and flew into the depths of the starry sky. Lu Yi turned his head and looked back. Once again he saw the shocking starry sky spectacle. Looking at it from afar, it seemed even more magnificent. 2 days later, Fan Yunhua suddenly said, "Master, this direction does not lead to the Sky Evolution Galaxy's insect path. Where are we going?" Hearing this, Lu Yi took out his star chart and compared it. He found that the direction was slightly off. Jianghu, who was resting with his eyes closed, also slowly opened his eyes and looked at Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan explained, "Naturally, we're going to receive the goods. This batch of goods is not with me for the time being." Lu Yi did not understand, but Fan Yunhua laughed softly. "It seems that there's something wrong with this batch of goods." He could not help but smile as he spoke. If there were no problems, they could have been delivered on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Only problematic goods would leave the 10,000 Elephant Sea and go to the depths of the starry sky. Zhu Yuan did not say anything. He just steered the spirit ship silently. Fan Yunhua also did not say anything. He had just said it casually. How could he continue to ask? Another day later, the planetary ship arrived on a desolate star. This desolate star was unusually harsh. Not to mention mortals, even cultivators with low cultivation bases would not be able to withstand it. Without sufficient knowledge, they could not deepen their knowledge. However, the 4 of them were constellations after all. They had strong adaptability. Zhu Yuan put away the planetary ship and led the way. Lu Yi and the other 2 followed closely behind. When they arrived, Lu Yi felt that something was wrong. Even if Zhu Yuan wanted to deliver goods to someone, he did not have to choose such a place. The starry sky was so vast. As long as there was no one nearby, it would be hidden. This place was more suitable for killing and robbing than delivering goods. Of course, it could also be that the other party was being careful. Fan Yunhua and Jianghu also realized this. They exchanged a glance and became vigilant. It was common for employees to have designs on their employers. However, not all employers were good people. Some notorious fellows liked to use this method to lure people to a secluded place and kill them. They would lose both their lives and their wealth. They spread out their divine senses silently and checked their surroundings. They found nothing unusual. After a while, Zhu Yuan led the 3 of them to the foot of a desolate mountain. There was a dark cave in front of them. His expression suddenly turned solemn as he stood outside the cave. Behind him, Lu Yi and the other 2 felt their hair stand on end as their expressions became tense. There was clearly nothing inside the cave, and their divine senses couldn't detect any abnormalities, but no matter who it was, all 3 of them felt as if they were rabbits that had accidentally stumbled into a tiger's den. It was as if an ancient ferocious beast was crouching inside the cave, ready to erupt at any moment. As they looked around, the dark cave was not just dimly lit. Instead, it was filled with some kind of black substance. Lu Yi slowly raised his hand and grasped the hilt of the mountain pan saber. Beside him, Fan Yunhua and Jianghu also silently circulated their spiritual energy, ready to attack. Along the way, Lu Yi had always felt that something was not right. At this moment he finally confirmed one thing. Zhu Yuan was not a good person. Transporting goods back to the Sky Spill Star system was just a pretense. His real purpose was to lure the 3 of them here. As for his purpose, it was unknown. However, there was a high chance that it was a common plot to kill and rob. There was only one thing that Lu Yi could not figure out. An existence that they could not detect even with their divine senses had to be stronger than Yu Yao. Moreover, it was not an ordinary Yu Yao. Would such a person be interested in the constellations? Robbing the constellations would not bring much benefit, so this matter did not make any sense. Regardless, the 3 of them had indeed fallen into Zhu Yuan's trap. No wonder this guy did not make a trip to the central island before setting off. As it turned out, it was completely unnecessary. They had been too careless. In the end, they were still inexperienced. In addition, Lu Yi was anxious to establish a good relationship with Zhu Yuan. After all, if they wanted to borrow the Sky Spill Star system, they needed someone to act as a guarantor. However, life was like this. There were always such accidents and it was impossible to guard against them. Let's go. Fan Yunhua suddenly shouted. Activating some kind of secret technique, he transformed into a streak of blood-red light and fled to the left. At the same time, the sound of a sword rang out. Jianghu merged with his sword and fled to the right. The 2 of them clearly knew that they were no match for the expert in the cave with their strength. Moreover, they were not familiar with each other in the first place, so there was no need to talk about sincere cooperation. At this moment, one of them fled to the left and the other to the right. No matter who the expert in the cave wanted to chase, the other had a high chance of escaping. Peak address, mobile terminal, thank you for your collection. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.